Euphoria Season 1 is one of the best melodramas to bleed into the mainstream in recent memory, and Euphoria Season 2 is a colossal disappointment and a waste of everyone's time. My time, your time, the actors' time, the crew's time. Well, actually, at least they got paid. All we got was blueballed. Sam Levinson, what did you do?
What did you do?
Okay, that's not fair. This season definitely has its moments, and there are some new ideas that worked incredibly well. But for everything that works, there's about 5 things that make you scratch your head in befuddlement. It's impossible not to feel cheated as an audience member on this one, and it's also not simple to describe why we feel cheated. Because despite the fact that there are certain scenes which are incredibly satisfying, in tandem, most of these moments don't really work well together. It's as if someone combined a hot dog, provolone cheese, peppers and onions, marinara sauce, Dr. Pepper barbecue sauce, and a dusting of Old Bay. My brain might enjoy these things separately, but it's tasting crab and hot dog and cola at the same time, and it's going into shutdown mode like, ah! Oh, and also there's dog shit on the plate. Hey guys, I'm not normally one to throw in content warnings, but Euphoria is a pretty graphic show with some pretty graphic language and imagery. There's some pretty sensitive topics in there. I can't cut around all of it. So if Euphoria is too much for you, then probably don't watch this video. But if it isn't, then I implore you to stick around.
It is my great privilege to introduce the cast and crew of Euphoria. Sam Levinson, creator. Zendaya.
HBO's Euphoria is the baby of Sam Levinson. The show was born out of him attempting to articulate his personal struggles with anxiety and drug addiction.
I was a drug addict for many years, and I had a lot of anxiety, and I really struggled with depression. And
I sat down with Francesca Orsi. We just had a conversation about just life and her life and my life and various struggles that we had been through and things. And she said, "Great, well, go and write that." And I said, "What?" She goes, "Everything we just talked about."
The result is a show which is powerfully raw and undeniably personal. A show which presents the perspective of an addict with striking empathy and familiarity. It's pretty groundbreaking for mainstream American television. Wait, no it isn't. Sam, you hag! All this to say, Euphoria is a personal piece. Sam was not merely a director for hire adapting a studio committee's script. This is his show. Without Sam, there is no Euphoria. So what is Euphoria? Talking about a TV show at any point but the beginning puts me in an awkward position, where I want this video to be accessible to people who haven't seen Season 1, but I generally don't want to waste people's time. So here's my compromise. I'm going to race through the main points of Season 1, as well as some of its greater themes and ideas, so that we can all be brought up to speed. If you've seen Euphoria, consider this a good recap to get reoriented in the narrative. If you haven't, this should tell you everything you need to know to follow the rest of the video. But come on, we all know everybody's watched this show. So let's keep this brief, meaty, and entertaining. A 1, a 2, a baloo-skadoo, we can too. Euphoria starts by introducing our main character, Rue, a smarmy, sarcastic, socially awkward drug addict who has just gotten out of rehab and has no intention of staying clean. As such, she immediately attends a party where the rest of the main cast will be waiting. The 2 characters of greatest secondary importance are Nate, the antagonist, and Jules, the love interest. Nate is a psychopathic jock with aggression issues and a borderline non-existent moral compass. Many of the actions he takes over the series are to protect him and his certified lover boy father, and many of those actions, surprise surprise, end up hurting a plethora of people. Jules is the new girl in town. She's stylish, feminine, and trans, that last point obviously being socially significant. Prior to attending the party, she has a hookup with an older man. Then at the party, she gets into a scuffle with the ever-persistent and aggressive Nate, whereby she slices her own arm to tell him off. Rue then meets her outside, and the 2 pass each other's vibe checks pretty quickly. So what's the big twist? It turns out that old man she was actually Nate's dad.
As my good buddy Eddie Burback once said, yikes!
This party also features just about every other important teen in the show. There's Maddie, Nate's bitchy, manipulative, cunning, and cruel ex-girlfriend. Cassie, Maddie's sweet, sarcastic, coy, but naive best friend. Kat, the meek but overweight virgin, McKay, the charming and good-hearted but ultimately narrow-minded best friend of Nate. Fez, the pure-hearted dropout drug dealer who's unsurprisingly close with Rue, and Lexi, Rue's childhood best friend and Cassie's sister who's timid and a bit of a narrative foil to Rue and Cassie. Okay, I know Lexi wasn't at the party, but I lacked an elegant way to include her in the intro, so we're all just gonna pretend she was. Also, this girl BB is here to vape and say stupid shit. Her character goes nowhere, has no depth, and does nothing. I'm here for it. She's a proper high school forgettable floater. At this party, Maddie f***s some guy in the pool to piss off Nate, Kat loses her virginity, and Cassie and McKay begin a situationship. Let's focus on the last 2 points for a second, since these arcs are pretty separate from the other events in the narrative. McKay soon goes off to college. He and Cassie do long distance. Do you want to guess where this is going? McKay is constantly distracted by the new pressures of doing well at school, football, and his social life. Cassie does not understand any of that and makes out with another dude several times while they're dating. Wow, what an asshole. Okay, I'm kidding. Cassie is honestly really charming and great and a boss bitch trying to help her mans, but her mans really just needed some time for himself, even if he didn't know it. The relationship ultimately dies when Cassie finds out she's pregnant and has a traumatic abortion. Overall, this is a great plot thread. Even though they do some pretty shitty stuff to each other, the decisions they make are always understandable, and you are always able to empathize with both of them. This is in no small part to how Season 1 is structured. Each episode begins with a flashback of a main character narrated by Rue. These flashbacks fill in details about each character's life, showing us little snapshots and key beats that lead to these people being the way they are. While this could feel kinda cheap or lazy, and believe me, at a certain point it will, it actually works pretty well here. Ultimately, a lot of the information conveyed is very visual, and her narration is more just a guiding point to take you through the fast editing. It also helps that the narration itself is witty and charming.
It's not like I was physically abused.
Attention deficit disorder.
Or had a shortage of clean water.
General anxiety disorder.
Or was molested by a family member.
And possibly bipolar disorder.
While it is obviously a core function of these scenes, it ultimately feels a little auxiliary. It's that extra note on top to help us parse these disparate events. Now we come to Kat's storyline, and I won't lie to you, this is a bit of a weak point. It's not that I don't get her, or that I think this kind of story isn't important, but it is just a little bit cliche, a little bit rushed, and a little bit on the nose. After Kat loses her virginity, she has a sexual awakening. She starts camming online with men for money, dresses more ostentatiously, and just about any guy she can. But at the same time, a sweet, dapper, likable kid named Ethan takes a genuine romantic interest in her. They flirt awkwardly at first, but once they run into each other at the fair, they really hit it off. Then we do the romantic comedy cliche where she walks away to get something, she sees him talking to another girl, and oh no, they got a big misunderstanding, and she decides to hurt his feelings. She fucks another dude at the fair and abandons him. Then at a later Halloween party, she treats him like shit, he eventually eats her out, and then she leaves him yet again. But finally, at the season finale's winter formal, she pulls him aside and admits she was being an ass. The two reconcile and form a relationship. I have no issue with Kat's character and concept, or with her having a more pronounced mean streak than the rest. I just wish her arc wasn't so written to the beat of other romantic comedies. If you've seen a romantic comedy, then you've probably seen this storyline. I will commend the show in that this one at least has more heart and expressive characters acting out those cliches, against what is a pretty uniquely dark and explicit backdrop. But when everything else is firing on all cylinders, this definitely stands out as just good. Alright, so now onto the real meat of Euphoria Season 1. Because while a lot of the stuff I just mentioned is either good or really good, this is the part that keeps people coming back. Rue and Jules get high on psychedelics. We watch their relationship blossom. At the same time, we see Rue go to NA, and learn that much of the reason for her addiction is to cope with the loss of her father. Then we get to... Wait, was that Madoka and Hamura on her phone? Was she watching Madoka Magica?
Do some homework, binge watch some Madoka Magica.
Oh my god, she was. I guess there are some similarities between the two. And they both lean into some druggy imagery. Did Euphoria rip off Madoka Magica? So Jules is sexting with some dude she met on Grindr who uses the tag Shy Guy. Simultaneously, Nate goes to beat the shit out of that guy Maddie in the pool, accusing him of raping a minor. And then the two quickly get back together. Nate even remarks that he knew Maddie was bullshitting, which just about sums up how deranged and dangerous he is. Finally, Rue gets caught up in a kerfuffle when she comes to her dealer's house at the wrong time and a CD higher-up dealer, Mouse, forces her to do fentanyl. Fez employs Jules to help take care of Rue, and Jules soon gives her an ultimatum that she must choose between her or drugs. But not before the audience learns that Shy Guy is actually Nate. Talk about awkward! Jules, unaware of this fact, employs Rue's help to send Shy Guy, who is now using the name Tyler, some softcore nudes. This stresses Rue out and makes her jealous, so she leaves the room, discovers an opioid in the bathroom, takes it, goes to NA, and then gets lectured after the fact by this guy Ali, who can tell she was lying about her sobriety. Some more stuff happens, Rue kisses Jules without permission, and then flees the scene of the crime. As you should after stealing a kiss. Then it's carnival time. Basically all the characters meet up, some plot lines get entangled, some seeds are planted for the future, but let's just summarize the main takeaways. First, Rue learns about Cal and Jules. Yikes. Nate chokes Maddie for embarrassing him in front of his family and calling his mom a but Maddie reveals that she saw some random dick pics in his phone and inquires about them. This diffuses the bond between them and they stay romantically engaged. Nate and Jules then meet up at the lake in private where Nate reveals he is blackmailing Jules to not rat out his father. Jules then comes to Rue upset about Tyler and the two kiss. Mwah mwah. Rue is now convinced they're a couple but Jules is not, and they never really have a conversation about it. The two of them go roller skating with Lexi, and she makes a casual aside about how Rue is doing better since meeting Jules. And indeed, she is staying sober. Jules is not the most receptive person to this news though, and her world is about to get worse. Nate's choking left scars on Maddie. Obviously, he is made the prime suspect. However, he gets Tyler to take the fall by threatening to report him for f***ing Maddie. Jules is blackmailed into being a key witness. This causes her to get really drunk and sloppy and kinda distance herself from Rue. When Jules creates the distance, Rue is a bipolar moment and manically puts together what she thinks happened involving Jules and Nate. She's like 90% right.
I was like 92% correct.
Shut up. Fez threatens Nate to get him away from Jules. Nate reports Fez to the police, causing him to lose a lot of drugs and money. But not everything is going peachy for Nate because he's having issues boning Maddie. She asks if he's gay, he flips shit, and then Maddie discovers the Jules and Cal CD in his room. She runs off with it. Meanwhile, Jules goes off to an old friend for the weekend. There, she talks about her sexuality and femininity and ends up making out with some girl. However, she definitely has a horror-inducing moment and comes to realize how much she misses Rue. In the finale, Rue and Jules decide to go to the ball together. Rue finally confronts Nate one-on-one when she finds him alone. She threatens to report Cal if Nate continues to be shitty to Jules or Fez. Nate responds with an ominous threat and a true, but harsh reading of Jules. Then Rue asks Jules if she wants to ditch this dance and bolt to the city. They do, but Rue develops doubts about the situation. The final nail in the coffin is Rue realizing she forgot her meds. To abridge what is already a long summary, Jules gets on the train, Rue does not. She walks home and is filled with thoughts about the horror of her life, and then she relapses. Awesome musical sequence, boom, season over. Also, there's a cliffhanger with whether Mouse will notice blood on the money Fez stole to pay for what he lost in the raid. So if none of you have picked up on it by now, this is basically Zoe 101, with a sea of dicks. So what's the point of all this? What is the theme running through this season? Grief? Mental health and addiction? Honesty and forgiveness? Yeah, sure, and why not? But really, if there's a single thing that stands out to me about Euphoria on a rewatch, it's how most of the conflicts in this show are based on communication. Kat and Ethan get into a cliche love triangle drama because Kat makes a presumption which turns out to be untrue. McKay never properly articulates the stress he is under or his tendency to contain his emotions. Cassie attempts to appeal to McKay through sexuality, but this is ultimately not what he needs. Nate struggles to realize and speak about his sexuality. Rue thinks her and Jules are in a relationship after they make out. Jules doesn't and chooses to make out with another girl. In most every instance, these conflicts could be resolved if the people simply talk things out. In particular, that statement really rings true for Rue and Jules, and I don't think people realize quite the extent of that until Jules' special. In between season 1 and 2, there are 2 episodes filmed over the pandemic. One from Rue's perspective, and one from Jules' perspective. Rue's special is good, but other than filling in Ollie's abusive past, it doesn't add a whole lot to the narrative. It more exists to strengthen the relationship between Ollie and Rue, while giving us a little more context on Rue's perspective. But that's the whole show. She narrates the damn thing.
I didn't build this system. Nor did I f*** it up.
Jules' episode, however, does inform us of new information and a new perspective. So let's talk about it. Not everyone watching was happy with Jules in season 1. There were a lot of people online calling her selfish or inconsiderate, and that isn't always wrong. But I think this is pretty overblown from people who aren't accounting for the fact that Rue is not a reliable narrator.
And to be honest, I'm not always the most reliable narrator.
We'll get into some of the nitty-gritty specifics about their relationship later when we talk about season 2, but for our purposes now, what matters is that Jules' episode helps to justify some of her actions from the first season. Thought Jules was being a bitch around Halloween? Well, I bet you didn't know that her mom came back, relapsed, and Jules internally blames herself for it. Did you know that Rue has a lot of uncomfortable parallels to her transphobic addict mother? Bet you feel like a jerk now.
Ultimately, in defense of Jules, I think we made a very good case as to why she is not a f***ing villain.
I personally didn't think all this context was necessary to empathize with Jules' interactions in season 1, and whether this was an extemporaneous retcon or something that was always planned is honestly difficult to tell. But I am glad this episode exists to help audience members realize how biased Rue is, that the way she is telling the story would not pass AP standards for objectivity. Especially on a second viewing of season 1, it is extremely evident that Rue contributes to many of the problems which arise with Jules. That said, Jules also doesn't vocalize any boundaries with her. Put plainly, Jules is someone who dresses ostentatiously to be seen by the world but keeps her emotions internalized, while Rue is someone who dresses to be nonchalantly ignored but lets her emotions be externalized. So who is really seen more by others? That's some great irony you got there. Oh, also, this episode tells us that Jules is going to partially detransition. I know that sounds really important, and that I almost forgot to mention it, but so did season 2's script.
How am I a nun?
You're a trans girl wearing a binder asking me whether I'm straight or gay.
Before we dive headfirst into that problem, let's briefly try to touch upon some of the show's appeal. Obviously, the show is gorgeous, and I don't think it needs much defense on the technical front from me. You can just look at screen caps and understand its beauty way faster than my words can justify it. And also, it sounds great. Labyrinth's soundtrack adds so much character, enough that I'm sure certain sequences and scenes would fall apart without it. Now is normally when I would just let the music play to stress a point, but YouTube isn't a fan of that sort of thing, so we're both just going to have to settle for hearing it quietly in the background. But seriously, his music has this weirdly modern blend of so many different styles that it adds a key component to the show's identity. But beyond aesthetic concerns, the chief appeal really does rest in its characters. This is both because of who they are and how they're written. Although Rue's monologues do spell out some details, Sam leaves a surprising amount up to us to understand. For instance, Rue is always biking everywhere. She clearly does not drive. Given how anxious her character is, this makes sense. But no one had to tell us that. We all knew. Shut up! But going beyond that, for a melodrama which aims to be this shocking and toxic, the characters of the show are surprisingly grounded and empathetic. Okay, Nate is probably a step too far, but just about everyone else, despite their shittiness, feels, talks, and acts like a real teenager. Characters speak in politically incorrect ways.
Mom, stop being retarded. He's not my boyfriend.
Everyone is passing everyone's nudes around like butter at the dinner table. A lot of the characters do shitty things, but you get the sense everyone is trying really hard to be a good person. It's pretty unlikely every character in the show went to your high school, but at least one of these characters went to your high school. If I have to suspend my disbelief to place them all in one school in one friend group, then yeah, I can suspend my disbelief on that front. Even setting aside the friend group's composition, not everything in Euphoria is realistic. Sometimes that's intentional.
Sam gave me the license to be free with it and not have to stick solely to what I consider to be realistic.
And sometimes that's just to heighten the spectacle. In a melodrama, this could be a real problem, but the report of consistent, likable characters and its immaculate presentation lets them get away with this. All this to say, Euphoria doesn't always have the most believable story, but it tells that story exceedingly well. If you still aren't convinced it's the characters people care about, I encourage you to see how many interviews, fan pages, and gossip sites exist for these actors. And I mean, can you really blame everyone for that? Just about every performance this season is great. There are some people in the middle of the road, In particular, I'm not a fan of Maud Apatow as Lexi this season, but to her credit, she improves a lot by season 2, so don't jump down my throat. But most everyone else feels inseparable from their role. You could chalk this up to picking great actors or having great direction, and while that's true, another detail I want to highlight is Sam's supposed writing process for these roles.
Whenever I cast someone, I sit down, we talk about life, and I try to just shape the character a little bit more towards who they are as an individual. I think with this is the first episode that I wrote after shooting with Z. There's a moment at the carnival when Rue recognizes that Jules is telling the truth about Cal at the chili stand. And it's this sort of like weird, almost Buster Keaton-esque moment. And then she does this thing where she moves to the side and walks up, and it's fucking hilarious and brilliant. She did that, and I was watching, and I was going, holy I wonder what else we can do in that realm, and of just allowing her to just play the physicality of it and the humor of it. The more that an actor has of themselves and the closer it becomes to who they are as a human being, I think the more authentic it becomes and the more ownership one has over the role and the more delicate they are, the more they want to protect that character.
It's kind of no wonder that people start to see these actors as the characters.
And then, Hunter, I almost called you Jules. And then Hunter.
While recasting is usually not met with high praise, I dare HBO to try and recast any of these characters. The backlash would summon 7 tsunamis capable of drowning the earth in a sea of rage and blood. Have whatever gripes you want to with Sam. If something like Green Book is any indication, listening to your actors and tailoring the narrative around other people's perspectives is clearly, sadly, not the standard. And for someone writing a TV show at the forefront of pop culture where he has virtually total control, I think that's pretty commendable. So yeah, despite some minor issues, I get the hype around this show. It's more than earned. It's obvious to me why people would connect with these characters. So what happens when you betray that bond people have developed with these complex characters and start writing them in ways which feel untrue to who they were? Well, you get Euphoria Season 2.
What's one word each of you would use to describe Season 2 of Euphoria?
Chaotic.
Complex.
Are we allowed to cuss?
I'll say funny. It's funnier.
Season 2 is Season 1 on steroids.
It's all exciting, and I think people are going to be surprised.
What a giant pile of shit.
In a TV show, your later episodes can only work with what you set up. So openings are crucial. They don't need to be the best part of the show, but they need to pave the way for the best part of the show. Episode 1 sets the whole season up for failure, which is weird to say for an episode which is admittedly entertaining and remarkably more cohesive than the rest of the season. But hindsight is everything, and this episode stacks the deck in the least satisfying way. So all that's left for the rest of the season is to watch these limp dick domino fikies fall over. Episode 1 begins with the backstory for Fez. We see his grandma shoot a guy, take an ashtray, and why he dropped out. It's all good stuff. But unfortunately, even right here at the very start of the season, there's something really distracting. There's 10 different songs in this sequence that we cut to in rapid succession. I'm not exaggerating, 10 songs in less than 10 minutes. Holy crap. Has anyone working on the show heard of the word overkill?
We have 37 songs in the first episode alone.
That's not something to be proud of, Jen. These episodes are about an hour long. Your song ratio to minutes shouldn't be 1 to 2, because A, that's just expensive. Do you know how much it costs to license music? Kiss your budget goodbye. But more importantly, B, spamming this much music is close to a virtual guarantee that none of it will actually be effective. Music can obviously lend a lot to a scene. It can set the tone. It can give it momentum. It can suggest something about the characters on screen. The editing team on Euphoria understands this.
I think the music of Euphoria has always represented the best qualities inside the characters in some ways.
It's a great tool as a filmmaker, but it often isn't the only tool. Scenes usually have this really important thing called dialogue, and it's what the audience is going to primarily focus on. Chances are, the music needs to be playing for a while if the audience is to absorb it and everything else in the scene at the same time. When you're switching this rapidly between songs without any self-restraint, it's really hard to build up any of the things I just mentioned. It's not impossible, I'm sure some editor could do it, but this just ain't it, homie. Unfortunately, this is going to be a pattern for the season going forward. So get used to never hearing more than 90 seconds of a single song before another one cuts it off. What is this, Suicide Squad?
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
Shut up.
I mean, crap, man. Look at that.
Yeah, so these two are dead now. So now we jump to New Year's Eve, where Rue is joining Fez and Ashtray on a drug deal with one of the people higher up the chain. When we get there, we get introduced to Custer, Fez's drug dealer bud, and Faye, his drug addict girlfriend. A match made in heaven. The boys go inside and Rue waits with Faye, who decides, now's a good time to shoot up. But then these two get yoinked on suspicion of being snitches, everybody strips, and then we get introduced to Lori, the quiet, monotone kingpin of this operation. She asks where Mouse and that other goon went, and Fez assures her that she doesn't need to worry about that. Anyway, enough of the serious drama, because it's party time again. Oh yeah, I sure missed these during 2020. So Jules comes inside, Rue has an anxious moment, she decides to hide from the party in Fez's car, and then she finds the heroin needle. Okay, yikes, we're going there this season. But here comes the big what the F writing decision number 1. Are you ready? Are you sure? Okay. So, Cassie and Lexi get into some fight on the way to the party. Cassie leaves the car, walks to some random beer store, and then runs into Nate. So immediately you're thinking, oh god, are they doing this? Are they really doing this? Really? Like, why? You know, aside from minor stuff with Ethan and Kat, we had largely dodged a lot of the teen romance cliches. But now I guess we need some more drama this season, so just pick 2 random characters and have them start. Here's a lesson in screenwriting 101. No, storytelling 101. Traditionally, we think of good stories as having a setup and a payoff. You can see this structure most clearly and blatantly in jokes.
I went down to Washington, D.C. for an anti-gun event, okay? I go to this thing, and it's me and a bunch of celebrities, and we speak out against guns. And I look at my website, and there's all these threats on there. I'm gonna put one in your head. I'll slit your throat. And I realize, oh my God, I need a gun.
Stories follow the same basic principle. You can even see this principle being used well in other parts of the episode. Faye leaves the heroin needle, Rue finds the heroin needle, capiche, got it? And if any of you dare comment about subverting expectations, I'm gonna scream so loud. So now that we're hopefully all caught up to speed, what was the setup for this relationship to develop? What in season 1 alluded to this happening? I'll give you some time to think. If you said nothing, then congratulations, you're correct. Nate and Cassie barely talk in season 1. They rarely so much as talk about each other in season 1. They're both seeing the other's respective close friend, and the few times we do hear them speak about each other, there appears to be some contempt for the other person.
Okay, whether I like her or not is irrelevant. The fact is she's a whore through and through, bro.
Cassie is flawed and vulnerable, but sweet. She wants someone who treats her with respect and sees her for who she is. That's clearly not Nate. Nate, sexuality struggles aside, desires someone who will fight him, but that he can control. Cassie is the opposite of that. So already, being asked to buy into a relationship between these two without some scenes or episodes that flush out a sudden change in their desires is a huge stretch. It is almost inevitable some massive character contradictions or rewrites are going to come up.
What is something Sam would come up with? He goes, what about Nate? Cassie and Nate. I lost it. I lost my mind. I was like, that's definitely something crazy.
But okay, let's be generous. Let's put what I said aside for a few moments and look at what this episode does to justify this relationship. Maybe they make it work. So Nate and Cassie have this overly blunt conversation where Nate inquires into Cassie's relationship status. Since he's good friends with McKay, Obviously, he knows they're already broken up, and this is just a ploy to flirt with her. While that makes sense on his end, it does mean we have to believe Cassie is this stupid not to challenge Nate in the conversation. That, or she also immediately decided she wanted to f Nate upon seeing him. I know I would. But by the way she seems to talk with him earnestly, I just take it she's kinda dumb. So by the end of the scene, our justification is that Nate wants to feel her and Cassie's dumb. Nate drives her to the party. He opens the beer bottles with his teeth and speeds down the highway. And yet again, already, this feels like a huge misunderstanding of Nate as a character. Nate is crazy, but he's not stupid. In fact, he's pretty f***ing smart. He knows how to emotionally manipulate and blackmail people. He stalks people for days in order to find the perfect moment to assault them. He has a temper, but when he isn't losing his cool, he's generally not reckless. Him ripping a beer cap off with his teeth and speeding down the highway while drinking it is so unbelievably dumb. The scene reads like an exaggerated caricature of his character from season 1, written by someone who didn't fully understand him. He's not just a crazy asshole, he's an intelligent sociopath. So yeah, they play a song, beer spills on Cassie, she takes her panties off, and oh my god, this is the cringiest shit ever.
I'm soaking wet!
And that's it. That's all the reasoning we get for why these two are going at it. Yup. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. Maddie tries to use the bathroom where these two are going to town. So Maddie yells at Nate to let her in, and Nate and Cassie talk strategy to make sure Maddie doesn't find out. Eventually, Nate opens the door and Cassie hides in the tub. Then hilarious hijinks ensue. And then some random dude comes in to flirt with her, but uh-oh, Cassie's phone goes off. The dude pulls back the curtain and sees her in the tub. He tells Maddie, but she's like, who cares, let's go dance. But I have to ask, she's sitting on that counter, right? She can't see into the tub from that angle? Like, not even in her peripheries. I bet I could. Get your vision checked, Maddie. So while Cassie has her hilarious moment in the tub, Lexi goes around looking for her sister. Here is where I must draw your attention to this line.
I can't believe Maddie's so sweet though.
When you first view this episode, this is likely to just go over your head as rather innocuous. But having watched the rest of the season, this feels a little more sloppily placed. In future episodes, actually just one episode, Jules is gonna hang out with Kat and Co. Now Jules and Kat were friends originally, so I don't have any kind of objection to this, but I do find this line really weird. I guess Sam or someone else realized Jules probably wouldn't get along with or like Maddie with how we knew her in season 1, so they just shoved this line in here to justify it. But I have my doubts that Jules would ever call Maddie sweet. She's really not. Don't get me wrong, she's charming and there's probably a good heart in there somewhere, but this feels like a very dishonest assessment of her character that's thrown in solely to justify later plot events. Some of you may think I'm being pedantic by focusing on a single line like this, but the way you set up your story is like vitally important to how your audience reacts to it. So yeah, this kind of line matters because it isn't just a throwaway piece of dialogue. It's a part of a narrative justification for things to come. Bear with me, once we get past the first episode, I'll tone down the specificity. So Lexi continues to go around the party, but then gets sidetracked by this dashing young fellow. They flirt with each other and yeah, they're pretty likable. She's a goody two-shoes, he's the drug dealer, they're both as sweet as one another. Mwah. They're a really interesting pair. I'm pro Fez and Lexi. You hear that, season 2 lovers? I don't hate everything here, I'm being fair. Now that said, just because I like them in concept, that doesn't mean I will love where this season takes them. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, we still gotta see the other people at this party. Once out of the bathroom, Cassie and McKay catch up. I hope none of you liked McKay last season because this is it. This is his final appearance. Both me and his actor couldn't tell you why, but this is the end for him. He shows up to talk to Cassie for 3 seconds and has an awkward objectifying exchange with Nate. If this were Togashi writing the script, I would trust that this character would suddenly re-emerge in a really interesting and justified way. But given the rest of this season, I have no faith for his character going forward.
Get out!
Bye! So finally back to Rue. Post-heroin, she runs into this jerk in the bathroom. They get high together, and Rue almost ODs, but pulls through after taking a stimulant. Okay, so this is going to be weird and specific, but I can't avoid bringing this up. I used to live in a city where certain neighborhoods were amidst an opioid crisis. I've seen a lot of people high on heroin. And while I would shower Zendaya with praise for her performance as a drug addict in season 1, she's just not quite hitting the mark here. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I wasn't always convinced she was high this season, especially in comparison to the last. It's hard for me to pin down exactly what is wrong, but it just seems a little off. Like she was basing her performance on impersonations of heroin addicts and not actual addicts. Look, I'm not the kind of guy that does hard drugs. I'm more the kind of guy who sits on the couch and watches Impractical Jokers. I'm really just doing my best to explain this one. Let's skip to the reunion of Jules and Rue. The audio editing here is obnoxious.
Rue?
Why does she sound that echoey and exaggerated? Before you leave a comment explaining that's how Rue sees it, realize that this scene is shot from Jules' perspective. We start at a flat angle on Jules and cut to a high angle on Rue, implying Jules' point of view. Rue is also not even looking at her until the end of the scene, but the effect applies throughout the whole edit. That means Jules is hearing the scene this way. So we're doing the whole I saw you in time stop trope, but it's just weird and distracting here. Which is funny because they do this same thing later in the episode and it actually works pretty well. But that's largely because they build up to it, they create an atmosphere, they let us get immersed. They don't do this for 2 seconds and then cut to somewhere else entirely different. Again, I wouldn't be harping so much on a little detail like this, except intrusive editing is going to come up in this season repeatedly. In fairness, the rapid cutting in this episode is a little better than most of the others which follow. I mean, at least all the characters are in the same place and the timing on certain things is crucial. But this overarching editing philosophy is going to bite the show later. Put simply, expressive editing does not equal good editing. So Rue reveals she relapsed the night Jules left. Big oof. And yeah, despite how much I complained about the start to this conversation, I thought their dialogue exchange was good. It was awkward, it was crushing, it had every emotion it needed to. And now that Jules has learned this information, we need to see how our character will process and respond to- oh god.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to be mean. I just really missed you.
I really miss you too.
What?
I want to be with you.
What?
Say something.
What? Okay, so let's back up and talk about Rue and Jules' arc in Season 1. Rue and Jules meet and immediately hit it off with each other. However, as one might expect, Rue's addiction gets in the way, and Jules gives her an ultimatum. Drugs or me? Rue manages to settle on Jules and get sober. Jules is thrilled by this until she realizes how much of Rue's mental health now rests on her.
Rue seems really good. It's because of you, you know.
If you somehow missed this, there's plenty from Rue's side which also alludes to how unhealthily she is viewing this relationship.
Jules, the way I was like putting way too much of my emotional well-being in her hands. You know, you just can't be mad at me for wanting you to be okay.
There's literally nothing in the world that Jules could do to make me upset.
What we are witnessing is codependency. After she realizes that the relationship is snowballing into an unequal affair, Jules tries to pull away. Rue doesn't pick up on this at first. And so Jules pulls away more, and more, and more. Of course, despite not knowing how to set a boundary and these two having very different ideas of what their situationship is.
Are you two in a relationship?
I mean, yeah, kinda. No, we're not a thing. I don't know what a thing is.
Jules does still very much care about Rue. She tries to stay friends with her, but there is definitely an internal push and pull at play.
But all this happened because I left. No.
This is complicated by everything going on with her mother, the blackmailing from Nate, and some internal issues about defining her femininity. Her relationship with Rue comes to a head at the train station. Although Rue suggested the idea, as we see them pack and prepare, we see her overcome by apprehension. Finally, when they get to the train, Rue reveals that she forgot her medication and no longer wants to board. She asks Jules to wait, and she says no. If you call Jules a bitch for not letting her friend get her medicine, I'm afraid you missed the point entirely. It's not that she didn't want to wait for Rue to get her meds. She didn't want to wait for Rue. Period. Rue was dumping far too much onto Jules, and it was emotionally draining her. Although she loved Rue, she couldn't be this unrealistic beacon of a friend when she had her own issues to deal with. I feel like I have to explain this constantly, so here it goes again. You aren't meant to hate Rue or Jules. This scene is emblematic of a tragedy.
Like, I think you could call the episode in a way a bit of a tragedy.
Right.
However, that's also sort of the formula of the show a little bit too, in that a lot of kind of tragic shit is going down.
You can understand why they are both doing what they're doing, but wish it were different. Which is why this opener doesn't make any sense. Sure, the train debacle, that literal event, could have been resolved and forgiven by these two, but they show no signs of resolving the underlying issues that led to it in the first place. If anything, Rue just reconfirmed what Jules had already thought and was desperately avoiding, that Rue has tethered her mental health and sobriety onto her. Without at least seeing an attempt from Rue to fix her problems, I can't fathom why Jules would change her mind and form a relationship with her. Having them get together here just removes all the subtext which made Jules' decision to ride the train so interesting and emotionally effective in the first place. It boils the scene down to, Jules wanted to take a train and Rue didn't, so she left her there. Jesus Christ, maybe Jules is the jerk people say she is. And setting the character writing aside, even if we pretend that this was in Jules' character the whole time, this is still a terrible narrative decision. In one episode, we just undid the climax of season 1. Sure, the fact that it made Rue relapse is important, but this is such a misstep in building a good story.
It was important to have Rue and Jules get back together right at the top of the season because essentially what Rue's always wished for is a relationship with Jules and the ability to do drugs at the same time. Why not just give her everything she says she needs and then see how it turns out for her?
Because by slamming the undo button, you just undercut the climax of your own show. Now you've primed your audience to take the whole story less seriously. You've told them that major writing decisions don't matter because the narrative will just revert them if inconvenient. It cheapens the entire ending to season 1 and forces us to view the drama with less gravity. Also, I like how this statement implies no agency on the part of Jules. Why not give Rue what she wants? Because Jules is her own complex and three-dimensional character. She is not just a tool of Rue's story. What a bummer. There was so much more room to explore. We could have seen how Rue and Jules would navigate their social circles after they're alone, what Rue might do to try and win Jules back, how Jules might shift her perspective to both better understand and draw boundaries with Rue, how either of them might react if the other ended up with someone else. There were a multitude of possibilities, and we picked the least interesting and the least satisfying one. Oh yeah, and Fez beats the shit out of Nate. It's satisfying, it's great. At least someone is still consistent and fun to watch around here. So really, when we boil down the issues in this episode, there are two major ones which stand out. Two major questions that should probably make even the least attentive viewer go, huh? Why is Nate with Cassie, and why is Rue with Jules? Could it be that these two strange choices are related? Well... I debated whether to put any of this in the script, but I realized if I didn't, it would be the entire comment section. So before we continue, I would like to just put a disclaimer here. Do not harass any of the people involved. That includes Sam, the crew, the actors. Leave them alone. Most of what I'm about to say is entirely alleged and based on unconfirmed leaks or conspiracy. I wasn't on set, you weren't on set. Whatever happened, we don't know enough details to be certain. Most of this isn't official press in any capacity. That said, I'll be damned if some of it doesn't seem likely. Let's start with what we do know. Euphoria Season 2 had some pretty long shoot days. Like, some sources claiming they were 15 to 17 hours long. While from what I can tell this wasn't every shoot day, it has been more or less confirmed that it was a sizable portion of them. I agree that this is not a best practice, but unfortunately, it isn't completely unheard of.
We were working, it was probably the 16th or 17th hour.
Although apparently this news stirred enough of a ruckus for HBO to respond and issue a statement. They claim that the shoot was safe and that this was common and normal. They fell on the COVID excuse for extending the shoot day, and they said they were in touch with SAG-AFTRA and meeting all the required standards. Even if we grant HBO that all of this is true, some of the stories presented by the background actors don't sound too great. There are reports of people being told they had to sit still and couldn't use the bathroom for half an hour. people supposedly not being fed a meal or given a shitty one, and I'm sure a slew of other substandard working conditions.
When you're an extra, you're like cattle to them. They literally herd you around. Yeah.
You know, maybe you could have licensed like 20 less songs to feed and pay your extras properly. Did you ever think about that? So, okay. So far, the accusations stand at long shoot days and a legal but toxic environment. The bad environment is pretty unacceptable in any professional set, in my opinion. And while I'm sure many people online would love to blame Sam, this one probably falls on Zendaya and the other producers. The director is the artistic lead. The producer is the technical one who is supposed to handle this kind of minutia. They're usually in charge of securing locations, getting meals, making sure the film is on schedule, all that kind of stuff. So if you're blaming solely Sam for this, just shut up. But don't get too comfortable, Sam, because I have a word for you. You know what can really speed up a shoot day? Coming in organized. Knowing exactly what you need to shoot, in what time frame, how it needs to be lit, what lenses you need, etc. Typically, the director and cinematographer make something called a shot list, which details all of this. Allegedly, Sam opted to just not do that. Are you serious? You and Zendaya have the audacity to keep people on set for 16 hours without a shot list? Now technically, this accusation is not actually confirmed, but it falls in line with what we already know about the production that while I can't say with legal certainty this happened, I wouldn't doubt it being true. Which is a little strange given all the press and behind the scenes we have available for season 1.
We storyboard every episode. It's about 880 storyboards per episode. So we know every single cut before we go in there.
It's really cool to be able to work with Sam, being really specific with shots and direction.
Is there any possible reason for this? Was Sam rushed, or did he choose to do this? Well, regardless whether this was a creative decision on his part or if he was rushed, this is completely unacceptable. In doing research for this video, there was one article I read that compiled quotes from the cast of Euphoria interspersed with that behind-the-scenes drama. Barbie Ferrer and Algie Smith both make weird suggestions about how they aren't quite sure what's going on with their characters. The rest of the cast also seems to err on the side of caution from definitively putting any matter of their opinion into the press. I would likely do the same if I was an up-and-coming actor in one of the most popular shows on television. The only way you'd ever really want to speak up is if you have power. So it should come as no shock then that the one person to say anything stern on the matter was the new executive producer, Zendaya. Zendaya told The Cut there were major changes made to the season when production came to a standstill for a year due to COVID-19. There are very few things that remain in the version you're seeing now. The things that didn't make it definitely needed to die. What on earth does that mean? What I'm about to say has a pitiful amount of evidence behind it, but if it's true, then it stands as the linchpin which explains where Season 2 goes so broadly wrong. During Season 1, Hunter Schafer and Jacob Elordi were allegedly very close. They used to go to events together, engage with each other on social media, etc. Then, at some point during 2021, they supposedly deleted shared posts and unfollowed one another. This has led some people to speculating that the two actors had a falling out and didn't want to be filmed together. Why? Allegedly, Zendaya and Elordi were in a relationship. They have both been incredibly private on the details, and neither of them seems to have ever spoken to the press about it. But there is some evidence out there to support this theory. Obviously, the two of them are no longer dating at this point. So the leading theory is that these three had some kind of falling out that forced rewrites of Season 2. In particular, the romance that was meant to be developed between Nate and Jules, as suggested by Jules' special episode, was scrapped. Thus, in its wake, we instead got the redo of the Rue and Jules storyline, as well as the Nate and Cassie storyline. To me, this is the missing piece of the puzzle. It would explain the two plot threads which feel inserted here and don't build upon the previous season. It would explain the plot threads that just got quietly dropped or abruptly resolved. It makes too much sense, and it would fix most of the problems the season sets up for itself. And before you go harassing these people, remember, we don't even know for sure what happened. If Zendaya said these changes had to be made, I believe her and so should you. Now I must turn my attention to Sam Levinson. Oh Sam, dear Sam, how I have such conflicted feelings about you. Before I critique Sam, I'm going to defend him a little bit here. If the narrative he was building suddenly had to make drastic changes due to factors outside of his control, I think it's a little mean and narrow-minded to direct all this vitriol at him. In fairness, it's possible he wanted to make some of these drastic changes independently. The guy does admit he breaks rules pretty often and changes his mind a lot with the script. But from what we know, the story seems more complicated than that. It's pretty hard to radically shift a narrative once you have already set up the story to go a certain direction.
You know, if you've planned your book that the butler did it, and then you read on the internet, someone has figured out that the butler did it, and you suddenly change in midstream and it was the chambermaid who did it, then you screw up the whole book because you get this foreshadowing early on, and you've got these little clues you planted, now they're dead ends, and you have to introduce other clues, and you're retconning. It's a mess.
So if all of this is true, Sam was certainly written into a bit of a corner. Imagine for a second if after A New Hope, Mark Hamill and David Prowse didn't want to be filmed together. How do you possibly resolve the main conflict in a compelling way when your main players don't want to be on screen together? I guess you just don't. If we think back for a moment, most of the plot threads from season 1 had seen some resolution. The two main ones which were left hanging were Jules and Nate, and Rue's relapse. When you have to scrap one of those, it's no wonder this season feels sloppy. But there are plenty of interesting characters outside of Rue, Jules, Nate, and Cassie, right? I already mentioned how Fez and Lexi bring some cuteness to the party this season. We got Maddie, she's always loads of catty fun. And speaking of catty, there's the ever-lovable edgelord Cat. She's got a lot to do this season, right? Right? What on earth happened with Cat? Again, no one is on record, this is all alleged. Kat supposedly did not agree with the direction her character was being written and walked off set. This caused Sam to either rewrite her scenes quickly or edit around her scenes, or basically she just got sidelined through every conceivable method. Supposedly, Sam tried to give her character an eating disorder and she disagreed. I know Barbie is on record saying the rumors aren't true, but there are a lot of reasons she would have to say they weren't even if they were. And yeah, I'm with Barbie on this one. Her arc was already kinda underbaked and cliche in season 1, and adding that plot thread would have been unnecessary. One of the main aspects people praised so much about season 1 was that Jules' character arc didn't revolve around her discovering she was trans and transitioning. While there's nothing inherently wrong with that arc, I agree that it's nice to just let a trans character be trans without making it the focus of who they are.
Each character, while having their own identities, is allowed to have a story and an arc that is beyond just the sort of identity box.
So why couldn't we do the same with Kat? Couldn't her being overweight just be incidental to whatever else her character was going through? Again, for the umpteenth time, I would like to remind everyone that this is all alleged and we don't know for certain, but given that Barbie has announced she will not be returning in season 3, yeah, I know where I'm placing my bets. Sam. You know, something that has confused me during the research process for this video is the world of difference between how Sam is portrayed in the media and how Sam and the cast talked about him in season 1. At nearly every turn in every panel and interview, members of the cast described Sam as someone who was very willing to alter the script.
And then I called Hunter, who was in, I think, back home at the time. And, you know, I was just sort of running through some ideas and what I was thinking. Hunter started kind of talking about, you know, the ocean, and, you know, it was some poem she had written when she was like 16. And at a certain point, I just said, I feel like you're writing dialogue right now. Do you want to just write this thing together? And she was like, yeah, I'd love to. And
to listen to other people and their experiences.
Every little bit of us, he observes and he builds a character to us, which was incredible. We had like so much say, and even down to the way we were dressing, or like maybe that line, I don't know if that's right, or, you know, like just the conversation was always open.
To try and imbue the same empathy into the struggles he was portraying on screen.
Kind of like dawned on me that, you know, Sam was incredibly talented and like empathetic and like had an understanding of like all his characters in a way that I wouldn't have like necessarily expected from like a white cis guy. Yeah.
Sure, these people are incentivized to speak highly of him. They're on a very successful show and he is their boss. But if you watch season 1, I really believe what they're saying. The show displays such a complex understanding of these people and their struggles that whatever issues you may have, you can't deny how much better the script for this season feels compared to what 90% of other cis white dudes in Hollywood likely would have churned out. So why, Sam? Why'd you stop listening this season? Why'd you stop making shot lists? Did your ego get the best of you? It does not help that there is a dearth of long-form press for this season. Most of the behind-the-scenes clips and interviews we have are from these official HBO promos. But if you look at Season 1, there are plenty of panels, Q&As, and 30-minute interviews with members of the cast. At first, I assumed a lot of this extemporaneous press probably went away because of COVID. And while there is definitely credence to that, the Euphoria COVID specials have these longer interviews available with Sam. So, what the hell? Why is all the behind the scenes we get either some highly edited, glossy extra available with the episode, or like 2-word quotes from the actors? Most of the press they've done since Season 2 just seems to be throwing these people into silly and entertaining scenarios, rarely speaking on the show in any long form. Now that I think of it, I'm not sure I could find a single real interview with Sam since or about Season 2. It's a little suspicious if you ask me. All this to say, I don't entirely know what happened. Whether any of this is true has no effect on the quality of the final product. It only explains it. That said, if we can do our best to cast all of this aside, if we try to look at Season 2 as its own independent product and not a sequel to Season 1, if we do our best to just analyze what we were given and not hold what the show could have been against it, are we left with something good? Even if I am not a fan of Nate and Cassie as a premise, is it interesting to watch? Does the show justify putting Rue and Jules together? Generally, no. It doesn't. It's not good. It's not good. I'm sorry, guys. It's not good.
Wasting all my time.
Episode 2 begins with Nate being rushed to the hospital after his scuffle with Fez. We go through Nate's damaged mind and see some of his inner fantasies about a life with Cassie. Rue narrates as usual, and already I'm getting pissed off. Film narration is often frowned upon in the critical and academic realms these days. But like anything else, it's just a tool. You have to know how and when to use it. The narration in Season 1 never bothered me because it always felt like it was there to add a little bit of extra context or speed up these scenes. Even without knowing the exact number of virgin pina coladas Kat has, I can still understand that this sugary drink caused her to gain weight and that made Daniel dump her. Even without knowing what spurred Jules' mom to take her to the facility, I can still follow how the horrible environment would have impacted her. If you took the narration out of these intros, while parts might be a little confusing, I guarantee that you could follow 80% of what is happening. If you took out Rue's narration, this scene would be extremely difficult to follow. Trying to navigate these fantasies and hospital visits and seizure-inducing imagery would probably just come across as some strange surrealist piece of storytelling. But beyond the immediate needs of the scene to be coherent, if you took out Rue's narration, the entire point of this introduction is lost. This exists solely to rewrite Nate's character.
Nate Jacobs was in love. He didn't know how it happened, but he could just feel it. He knew it was a little soon to say, but he could imagine spending life with her. What was it about Cassie Howard that allowed Nate to fully surrender himself?
I don't know, Rue. Tell me, because it sure as shit won't make sense otherwise. Could we be more forward? When people complain about narration telling and not showing, this is the kind of narration they're talking about. Everything that is important in this scene is told to us and not shown. What we are shown are some bizarre fantasies that contribute nothing to the plot and are used to masquerade some really terrible writing. Why would we develop the characters to like each other when we can just use a monologue to justify it bending over backwards to rewrite them? That'd be much more narratively efficient. Can we please cut to something else? No, not that! So Rue and Jules kiss when Elliot walks into the scene. Boy, doesn't this feel like a metaphor for what is to come. Then Rue delivers this confusing line.
If this asshole says anything about doing drugs.
Wait, didn't she already see you doing drugs? You had a whole conversation where you admitted you relapsed. Did she think it was just weed? Or did you convince her off screen between these 2 episodes that you had quit drugs again? Well, in addition to suggesting Jules gave up on her autonomy from Rue, which I guess is already out the door since they're back together, is Jules really that stupid? How long are we supposed to believe Rue can fool Jules? She has an opioid rash on her otherwise acne-free face, goddammit. Does doing opioids make you like Palpatine, where you can just trick everyone around you into being stupid? And by everyone, I mean Jules. But no, Jules doesn't notice Rue's drug use, and she doesn't think Elliot and Rue are doing drugs. Instead, she suspects they're hooking up. She storms off angry.
Was it just me or was that super awkward?
That was awkward.
What is this, a fucking anime? Was that Boku Sukomi?
ものすごいさっきうっかり泥棒だの海賊だのと言っちゃったな海賊だ
Sam, you're pulling some interesting inspiration this season. Maybe this video really does belong on the channel. Then we jump back to Cassie. And with Cassie, we jump everywhere. We get more flashbacks, more rapid cutting, and more annoying narration.
Since winter formal, Cassie had gone through a low-grade depression. But she never would have said yes if Maddie and Nate were still together.
I mean, if we're gonna justify Nate changing his entire character's priorities through a Rue monologue, we might as well give Cassie the same treatment. So yeah, the justification Rue gives for Cassie suddenly loving Nate is that she wants to be loved and she was depressed. Good enough reason for me to make her into a completely different person. Maddie starts babysitting for some family and likes to try on their fancy schmancy stuff when they're not around. There's this implied urgency every time they come home that she needs to not be wearing any of their clothes. The first time this happens, it's really tense. But don't worry, this thread goes nowhere and is insignificant. Barring I have anything else to say about it, you can more or less expect me to just skip this whole plot going forward because it doesn't matter. Then we're on to Kat. Ethan uses the bathroom when they're making out, and then some fantasy Viking kills him.
I just read that being surprised by whatever was happening. Probably for a second not understanding if it was a fantasy or not.
What are you talking about? Who watching this would wonder if it was real for a second? The Viking then comes on screen and the shit out of her. We then see her lying to her friends, claiming Ethan did this. Okay, got it. She's sexually unsatisfied by Ethan. Did we need to demonstrate it this obnoxiously? Nate and Cassie catch up, and Nate warns her that if Maddie learns of their affair, she will murder her. There is then a bizarre montage of Maddie beating the shit out of people. Is this real? Is this another fantasy? I don't know, the show doesn't tell me and it's wildly unclear. But my impression is that these are flashbacks and it's meant to be real. Remember in the last season when Chokemarks got Nate pulled out of school and under investigation? So you mean to tell me the same school which insisted on investigating Chokemarks from an altercation off school property would just ignore this kind of violence on school property? Don't worry, this is only the beginning of this season's insistence upon making school as unrealistic as possible. It just gets worse from here. Jules then accuses Rue of liking Elliot. Yep, that's it. That's the scene. Moving on. So Cal comes over to the Howard household and asks them if they know who assaulted Nate. The scene has some meandering paths and flashbacks, one of which lets us know that Faye is now staying with Fez, but the ultimate point is Cassie rats on Fez, and this causes a fight between her and Lexi. This inspires Lexi to go and try and meet Fez, but uh-oh, someone has a similar idea. And he's bringing a gun. Hey, you need some instant tension? Just hit the add a gun button to the scene. Now the audience will pay attention to your boring dialogue. So Cal, Lexi, and Fez all stand in this convenience store, and the script tries to lean into dramatic irony since we know Cal has a gun. But he does nothing with it. He just buys a cheap item and leaves. What a fake out. Ashton Kutcher, are you back there behind the soda cooler? You can come out now. By the way, everything from the music in this scene to where it's placed in the runtime suggests this is the dramatic focal point of the episode. And it's literally nothing. Nothing happened. Meanwhile, Rue hangs out with Elliot to do some drugs before her NA meeting. They have a conversation which is pretty forward where Rue explains why she uses drugs. I do actually think this scene works. Elliot isn't annoying yet, and the way this conversation is presented feels adequately naturalistic to be believable. I guess if nothing else is working, you can at least count on Sam to get the addiction component of the script right. Although Elliot does say one line that exists more for the audience than for Rue.
How does Jules not know that you're doing drugs?
Ugh, because I'm good at my job.
Okay, I guess that's all the reasoning we're getting as to why Jules suddenly has half a brain cell. Back to Kat and...
Kat was depressed because she couldn't figure out why she didn't love Ethan.
Would you stop explaining the characters, please? Trust your audience to understand the characters a little bit better. And if you can't trust them to do that, then maybe you aren't writing it well. Kat realizes she may not like Ethan, and she turns their date into a whole kid and caboodle where Maddie and Jules join. Oh, so that's why this out-of-character and randomly placed line was here in the first episode.
I can't believe Maddie's so sweet, though.
Duh. While they bowl, Cassie meets up with Nate. Rue notices them. Cassie and Nate go to this construction zone where Nate tries to insist that it's over, but the two bone again, solidifying their new situationship. And then finally, Finally, something happens. Cal asks Nate why Fez beat him up, and Nate partially lies, saying that Rue, Jules, and Fez are threatening to go to the police with the CD of him and Jules boning. Cal then asks where this CD is. This whole scene is wrong. So by the way Cal reacts, it's unclear whether he knew that Nate was aware of the sex disc collection. He's so remarkably calm, it almost reads like he knew that Nate knew. But if that's the case, why hasn't he asked Nate to return the Jules disc prior to this? We were told in season 1 that he monitored his collection meticulously. So wouldn't he freak out if he knew Nate was swiping them? And wouldn't he freak out the moment he realized the CD of him was no longer in his possession? But if he didn't know that Nate was aware of any of this, then why doesn't he have a stronger emotional reaction? I know Nate cut off his apology, but wouldn't you expect, I don't know, something other than this reaction? So either he knows Nate knew about this and he chose not to ask for the disc back over the course of like 1.5 months, or he didn't know Nate knew but didn't care enough to look into where that might be. You are remarkably stupid. And yeah, that's the end of the episode. So what happened? Everything significant here did not need a full episode to be addressed. Do we really need a full episode of Will They Won't They with Cassie and Nate? Especially after that intro, we all knew that this was going to persist. Did we really need a full episode just to understand Rue is doing drugs with Elliot? Or that Kat is dissatisfied with Ethan? Other than the Cal Disc storyline, how much of this episode actually advanced the story in a way that justified a nearly 1 hour runtime? And even then, the whole convenience store thing is inconsequential and really drawn out. Just watch the cast on the episode 2 promo scramble to try and explain what their character is doing this episode.
I think initially with the Nate and Cassie relationship, I didn't really understand it. I was worried that it was just a high school trope and just, different people sleeping with different people.
Has always made her so special to me. She's a very internal, imaginative person.
Playing her this season feels really internal.
What on earth does that mean? This is not internal. This is internal. This is just nothing. So then why was this still so much to summarize? Mainly, because we cut between shit so frequently and so rapidly that there aren't really many scenes this season. Scenes typically have an arc, a setup, beginning and end, something is gained or fought for by the characters in the scene. Season 1 had a lot of scenes in it. This season just rapidly jumps from person to person. Arcs are sometimes resolved if there are any to be found, but it's usually across like 9 edits. The result is that it is often hard to get into the drama or the emotions of what is happening because we move too quickly. Even with this episode, I straight up skip parts or condense things to make it sound like it happened all at once. I'm not saying you can never cut away mid-scene, but show some restraint and know when to do it. Christ. When this becomes your entire philosophy, it doesn't heighten the tension of each plot, it just annoys the audience because it drags everything out. I have my suspicions as to why this might be the case.
Season 1 was like a very in the moment, very present feel to it. This feels like some sort of memory of high school, I think.
The first idea about season 2 of Euphoria was, how do we get it to feel like a memory?
Oh, so is that why the whole thing is just randomly incoherent and feels like shit is missing? Like a long distant memory where you only have pieces? Sam, you aren't writing Perfect Blue, this is a melodrama. You're a talented director, but this isn't an anime and you ain't no Satoshi Kon. This isn't a horror movie about someone losing their literal mind and sense of identity. It's about a kid who does drugs in her dysfunctional friend group. Alternate theory, maybe Sam didn't have the coverage he needed to make a scene flow from start to finish. Maybe there were violations of the 180-degree rule, or the 30-degree rule, or something like that. I know that would be pretty atypical for a production this high of a budget, but so is not having a shot list. And hey, wouldn't you know, having one when you shoot usually ensures you'll have the coverage you need to edit. To be perfectly fair, maybe this is just an incredibly irritating stylistic choice. I don't know. You can decide for yourself. Now we get to episode 3. Episode 3 gives us Cal's backstory. And you know what? It's great. Possibly one of the best flashbacks in the whole show. Rue's narration provides some context, and then we're allowed to experience the scene organically. I'm pretty sure she straight up just stops saying anything around the 8-minute mark, and then the scene goes on for another 7. In these 15 minutes, We come to naturally understand that Cal had a best friend with whom there was high sexual tension. They hooked up, but right around the same time, he also gets his girlfriend pregnant, meaning he is now going to be a family man and can no longer explore this side of himself.
One of the things I love most about the show is being able to sort of provide more context why someone is the way they are. Someone may have hated the character of Cal before this opening, but that backstory was always a part of him. It just wasn't something we knew.
This is precisely what Euphoria Season 1 was talented at, and I agree with Sam that it really works in this episode. You get immersed, you feel things, it's great. And then this scene happens.
Call me irresponsible.
Now you may be shocked to learn this, but I think this scene is also pretty good. We get another one of those Euphoria lectures we got in Season 1, except this time it's about how to hide being a drug addict. Rather than just making bizarre and obnoxious stylistic choices that add nothing, this serves to both give us insight into how the minds of addicts work, and show us what Rue has done specifically over the last few months. And so for the first 20 minutes, it feels like the show is starting to get a grip. Rue convinces Jules to meet Elliot. They have a cute little interrogation which sets up Elliot as a character in a pretty quick manner. You learn about his sexual history and sexuality.
I didn't say that I didn't want to you or Rue.
So you want to Jules?
And, you know, even though you've been gangbanged by the entire galaxy, you're great, okay? And I want to be friends.
So interrogation done, Rue and Jules bike away to make out with one another. Then she does drugs. We're about halfway through the episode now, and while I can't say I've loved all of it, most of it has been pretty solid. We'll come to realize later that this was all in service of some boring bullshit, but at least it was in service of something, as opposed to nothing. Now we cut to Lexi, where the frustrating filler commences once again. For some reason in the convenience store, of all places, Lexi realizes she is an observer. How do I know this? Oh, because Rue tells us.
Lexi realized there was a reason she never tried to intervene before. She was an observer.
What? Did you think they'd have the character say or do something to indicate this? Of course not. This is Euphoria Season 2, baby. So Lexi talks to the vice principal and gets permission to put on her play. Mind you, she hasn't written it yet and no one knows what kind of content it will contain. But he just approves up front. You don't want to screen her script for content or anything? Make sure it's appropriate for an underage academic setting. That's usually how you prevent bullying or explicit content or some other kind of disaster. In Season 1, the high school felt like high school. In Season 2, it feels like a prop for the script. Then we cut to the most insufferable thing so far. So they insert this weird promo for Lexi's play? TV show? In the middle of the episode, featuring the real actors, and it's like a behind-the-scenes look that breaks the fourth wall, except it doesn't because they're all in character, but Lexi is talking to a camera crew. Whose crew is this and why? Is this her fantasy?
It's about love and friendship.
What is this?
What is this? What is this? Jesus Christ!
Is she fantasizing about Rue talking to the crew? Why would she fantasize about someone else's interview? For a TV show that doesn't exist? Haha, isn't Euphoria so tongue-in-cheek? Pay no attention to the fact that nothing is really happening and the stuff that isn't that interesting. This is dumb. This is lazy, stupid, nonsensical, and it's not funny. This demonstrates the same grace as a Family Guy gag. It's a stylish distraction that makes you go, what? Wow, the first time you see it, and stop every subsequent viewing. So Cassie now decides she's gonna get up early every day to look good for Nate. Like 3 hours early. I promise you no teenager on the planet is doing this. Then she passes Nate in the hallway and... What on earth was that musical sting? I mean, I know it was clearly Labyrinth's voice from the Season 1 soundtrack, but why is it there? What did that add? I don't know, but it sure as shit was distracting. Then we spam this over and over to show Cassie is behaving this way obsessively. And then, gotcha! We're back to Lexi talking to the principal, because the editing already isn't confusing enough.
I'm writing this play, and I was wondering if I could put it on.
Sure. Sure, he said with his mouth clearly closed. Back to Jules and Rue and Elliot, they take turns playing Truth or Dare with each other. Elliot dares Jules to pee in the street and she obliges. Jules dares Elliot to ask these guys about scat play. Admittedly, the second dare is funny. Then we cut to Jules and Rue at Elliot's bed making out, and Rue tells Jules not to sexually advance while here. So like, what was the point of all this just now? I'm asking for a friend. I guess the point is to show their friendship is growing, but did we really need them to do nothing? If this were the only instance in the season of what feels like a drawn out or inefficient scene, I would not be complaining. But when it's alongside a bunch of other filler, and what is technically in service of is just annoying and bad, it really starts to grate on your patience. So after this, we have this really great scene where most of the main cast happens to be in the bathroom at the same time. Rue sees Cassie and asks if she is auditioning for the play Lexi is doing. Cassie doesn't know what the play is, and then these two step in to say she looks like she is auditioning for Oklahoma. Then Rue reveals she has been smoking weed.
You relapsed?
She says she's stuck to weed, and everyone moves on from that unconcerned. Really? None of you care at all? No one is gonna call bullshit? Are you all as dumb as Jules this season? She really isn't hiding it well. Then Cassie goes into a meltdown and gives a massive speech to everyone about how she's f***ing Nate. Aw, shit. Something is happening. Actually, just kidding. It was all a fantasy. She never said that. Okay, what the f*** is with all these weird, random, inconsequential fantasies? It's used for 3 seconds in this montage. Kat has the whole thing with the Vikings. Lexi's TV show. And now Cassie just has an entire monologue which never happened. Why are we doing this? Is this Sam seeding that nothing interesting is actually happening, so he has to throw out stuff to pretend it's interesting, but then make it a fantasy so there's no consequences? In Season 1 and the specials, the style felt in service of the story, scene, or emotions, not in place of them. If the fantasy adds something to the plot or actually says something about the characters and enhances the narrative instead of ripping you out, I can get behind it. But I implore you to answer me, what on earth did this line really add to the scene? All that line did was make me like her character less. Which, like, good lord, what are they doing with her character? Where's the sweet and sarcastic Cassie? When did she become this whiny, insufferable bitch? She's lost all depth and has just become a ride or die stand for Nate. For reasons that were explained to me directly by Rue, but that I still have trouble believing. Then Cassie talks to Maddie and tries to convince her not to get back with Nate. Then the two of them bone, and Rue lets us know this is a weekly thing. Kat meets Ethan's parents, and yeah, this goes nowhere because Barbie scenes were cut, so we can just move on. And then Cal goes to stake out Fez. Ashtray catches him, and he asks Fez for the CD. Fez knows nothing of its contents and is horrified to learn of them. He does say one thing, though, that is irritating in the context of this season.
Your son, the one that's in love with Jewel?
Really is a shame we aren't following up on that one and are instead stuck with this. So everyone more or less agrees to forget this entire interaction happened. Well, I'm really glad we spent 2 episodes building this up. To nothing. Thanks, Rian Johnson. Okay, yes, this does contribute to Cal's breakdown in the next episode. But this could have just as easily happened after the end of episode 2 without this detour. Nate could have just been like, yeah, I don't know where it went. Then we could cut to Cal's breakdown and it would make just as much sense. You also could have cut down on him stalking out the store in episode 2 if the arc between these 3 collectively wasn't going anywhere. This is really starting to feel like a soap opera. Rue goes back to Lori and gets some free drugs by insisting she's going to deal for her. Lori obliges and threatens Rue should she fail to pay her back. Then Rue takes this suitcase to NA, which catches Ollie's eye. He bothers her about it until Rue mentions him physically abusing his ex-wife. Low blow, Rue. Low blow. She walks away, and it's implied that Ollie will never speak to her again. I enjoy all of this. Rue is being a piece of shit, but it's a narratively satisfying and interesting way to be a piece of shit. Do you know who's being an uninteresting piece of shit? These two. Jules and Elliot have a conversation about how Rue is not a sexual person. This could be compelling, except we don't really follow up on this in any way beyond episode 4, so who cares? Then Elliot starts flirting with Jules. Is this really what we're doing? You know what's better than 1 love triangle? 2 love triangles. Off. This was the best drama you could invent? Just having people other people and get passively angry at each other? Remember when Nate beat the shit out of Tyler? Remember when Rue was emotionally dumping on Jules? Remember when McKay was trying to impress those frat bros? Remember McKay? All of that drama is way more interesting than 2 forced love triangles. This is my plea with Hollywood to stop this trope. And Tokyo while we're at it. So to recap, We're 3 episodes in and barely anything significant has happened. In the last 2 episodes, what matters is that Elliot and Jules are starting a love triangle, Cal finds out about the disc, Rue gets drugs from Lori, and Lexi gets permission to put on a play. All of that could have just been 1 episode, and you would still have at least 20 minutes left over, and we wouldn't even have to see this, or this, or this. Before we go on to episode 4, let's talk about some of the overarching technical aspects of the show. Some of you may or may not be able to tell, but this season was actually shot on film.
We had reached out to Kodak to see if they could remake Ektachrome for us, because we both loved that film stock. They ended up, converting their factory in order to remake Ektachrome for 35.
There are a lot of people who really love this. Personally, I don't. I think the early days of digital are a little rough. I think The Phantom Menace looks a lot better than Attack of the Clones, purely because it was shot on film. But nowadays, I don't consider one format better than the other. It really just comes down to an aesthetic preference. For me, that preference changes depending on the project and what it is trying to accomplish. For the most part, I think Euphoria looked better when it was digital. This season has its strengths. Just about any shot that has or is imitating natural lighting from a sharp angle looks 20 times more amazing than it did in season 1, so that would include this shot, this one, and this one, among many others I'm sure. That said, I really prefer the look of season 1. I think the colors popped way more in the previous season. There's a lot more expressive and beautiful images from that one which have stuck in my mind. Season 2, by comparison, feels generally warmer all around. This results in less color contrast between the highly saturated outfits and everything else around them. That said, both seasons honestly look great, and I'm not going to harp on this too long. If you prefer the new look, I completely understand and respect your preferences. But you know what was a big downgrade? The soundtrack.
Season 2 is season 1 on steroids.
You mean downers? Cause I'm sleeping through this crap. Holy Joseph, Mary, and Third Raikage, what happened? I've already complained a lot about the needle drops, and while that is part of this, it isn't what I'm referring to. Right now, I'm talking about the original score. It is so much worse this season. I barely remember a single song. Part of that is probably due to how much less prevalent it is with all the needle drops, but even when I go to listen to this music outside of the show, it is so much worse. The same composer is involved. Why does it sound like 5 times worse? Admittedly, I'm not the most well-versed in music theory, so describing what is off about it may be in vain for my qualifications. That said, let's look at Spotify's data to see how much more people streamed the Season 1 soundtrack in comparison to 2. Yikes. When adding up the total views across both, yes, this is a thing I bothered to do. At the time of me writing this, Euphoria Season 2 soundtrack is a total of... Okay, here we go. 514,095,841 plays across 22 songs, with most of those views concentrated into these 2 lyrically driven bonus tracks at the bottom. When we remove those 2 bonus tracks, the total views falls to 38,188,068. Euphoria Season 1's soundtrack across 26 songs is a total of 1,615,533,363 plays. Holy crap. I know this soundtrack has been out longer, I know it has a few extra songs, but I cannot stress enough how astronomical of a lead a billion plays is. I wouldn't be shocked if Season 2 never even reaches that number. If it does, it will take years. So how did this happen?
Well, Zendaya said she spent all her free time in the studio with Labyrinth, so I blame her.
That's how some of the arguments I read on Twitter sound to me. In truth, I don't know why this got worse. Sam definitely implied he wanted to diversify the soundtrack, so maybe he encouraged Labyrinth to make music outside of his typical genre and talents. Or maybe he just had a bad album. That's pretty common even for most great artists. I don't know. The point is, it makes a lot more of these scenes way less memorable, have way less energy, and yeah, it makes the show less interesting to watch. And right now, it really doesn't need any more points against it. So then we get to episode 4. Jules eats Rue out and whoa, look at these pretty pictures and recreations. We're definitely not wasting any time. Again, what is this adding? What is this? What is this telling us?
What is this?
It's cool looking, it's pretty, but the only thing it says is what we already know. Just shove a pretty picture in their face. They won't notice nothing in the plot is advancing. This is like dangling a shiny object in front of a cat. Except I'm not meowing. So Rue fakes coming and Jules is suspicious. A lot of guys know that story. Oh, come on, you know it's true. It's so true that Jules confides her suspicions in Elliot and asks for advice. He shows her how to eat. No, wait, no. Stop. Okay, so clearly Elliot is the substitute for Nate this season, but holy shit, this is so much less compelling. The events of season 1 implied that Nate had a sweet and tender side somewhere deep within himself, and that the pressure mounted by his father turned him into an aggressive monster. By virtue of the way he handles the Jules situation, and some of the things he says to her at the lake and about her to Rue, we could infer that he legitimately possessed some kind of admiration or attraction for her. I mean, why do you think he had his father's disc in the room after he had already seen it? Just to double check? No, he was clearly attracted to Jules. Likewise, Jules' special indicated she was clearly attracted to Nate, or some aspects of him. Jules understands that Nate is incredibly dangerous, unstable, and inconsistent, so while the person she is attracted to exists somewhere inside of Nate, it is not all of who he is. Nate is too macho and deluded to admit he may be attracted to someone who doesn't neatly fit into the societal expectations of a feminine woman. So here, we had two people with mutual feelings which were complicated by both internal and external conflicts. Watching them try to navigate a relationship with one another while growing and changing into different people sounds exciting. It sounds intense and interesting, and a pretty bold thing to explore on a massive network television show. What is Elliot adding? Why is he here? What do him and Jules have going on? So what, they flirt with each other? I got news for you, Sam. That isn't likable or fun to watch when one of them is in a relationship with the main character. Having a character cheat for, like, no reason, other than the fact that she finds a guy suave and cute, is vain and indefensible. Cheating is not something that's easily justified. People can easily imagine a dire situation where they may have to steal from or kill someone. The same cannot be said of cheating. You can hardly ever make the case someone truly deserved to be cheated on, so if we are to empathize, it needs to be narratively justified on the end of the perpetrator, not the victim. On that 70s show, Jackie Burkhart was presented as a needy and difficult girlfriend.
Michael, Michael, come back here! Michael, I am talking to you! Michael!
But everyone still wanted Kelso to get caught with Lori. If a relationship isn't working, most people understand the right thing to do is break it off, not go behind their back. Having Rue being a little bit shitty and inattentive as a partner is not a good enough reason for Jules to cheat. It's a good enough reason for Jules to dump her, but not to cheat. Compound that with the fact that her character is suddenly too stupid to know her addict friend has relapsed, and she's quickly losing all appeal she may have with the audience. I empathized with the selfish decisions Jules made in season 1. The narrative justified these actions. This is not justified, and it only makes Jules unlikable. All it does is reinforce the shallow interpretations some fans had of her character back then, painting her as a deeply selfish and manipulative person. And the crazy thing is, if you just swapped Elliot for Nate, this could have worked. We understand that Jules and Nate have a complex history, that the two of them cheating with each other would stem from a much deeper place than either of them being a little promiscuous. It wouldn't make us root for Jules to get away with cheating, but we would at least be able to empathize with her. That's what the narrative does with Rue. We want her to get caught and stop using drugs, but we also still empathize with her. But with Jules, I'm left to feel nothing but contempt. Good lord, where were we? So the title appears and this opening sequence happens that blends together Maddie's birthday party, which will be seen later in the episode, and a conversation between her and Nate. The shots from the party let us see the guilt that has come over Cassie. It's a little redundant, but it isn't a completely useless addition to the episode either. My bigger objection is why this scene is placed here from a structural standpoint. Why are we dragging out and intercutting this conversation in the party when following this, we are cutting to events way before the party? This doesn't really function as a cold opening, nor does it tell us anything really important that will make the rest of the episode more understandable or coherent. It just feels like something Sam or the editors thought would be pretty when set to the music. So Nate tells Maddie he loves her, which if the monologue from episode 2 is to be believed, is just a ploy to get the disc back. Of course, he can't really explain that to Cassie, so they get into a fight. Cassie says she never would have slept with Nate if she thought him and Maddie would get back together, and Nate calls bullshit. What Cassie is saying is probably true, but also she should know they've been on and off many times up to now, so... Then the argument takes a turn for the confounding.
You know what you don't realize, Nate? Is I don't care what happens to me.
Cassie claims that she is only sleeping with Nate to prevent him from getting back with Maddie. Nate says that's insane. Cassie claims she is more insane than Maddie and will blackmail him into a relationship with her. At this point, I have stopped believing either of these two as characters. They no longer feel like teenagers, they feel like teenage-shaped objects. Teens are hormonal, just have them argue, and in a logical way that makes no sense, who cares. Cassie clearly doesn't want love anymore, she just wants to be a bitch.
What the is wrong with you? What the is wrong with you? Euphoria, shut the up. I know that was you, I ain't even gotta look.
This is just like, such a misunderstanding of what made Nate work. Remember what I said in the car scene? Nate was intimidating because he was quietly threatening. He was calm. Unpredictable. The scene isn't scary because he's yelling.
You're f***ing dead to me. F*** you.
It's scary because he's not. This moment is just overdone, explosive rage. Basically, the only time we see Nate scream at this level of intensity in the first season is when he's super drunk in the first episode and when he fights his father. And like, holy shit, did that feel justified in that scene given, you know, everything else? This does not feel justified. This is dumb. Also, wasn't one of Nate's talents manipulating people? Why did he get so much worse at it between seasons?
Cassie, stop.
Was that the best take they had? Cassie, stop. He's not even in the frame. You could have dubbed that over really easily. Sometime later at the Jacob household, Cal gets belligerently drunk. He insults his son and tells him he's going for a drive. He has definitely lost his mind now that he thinks he isn't getting that CD back. And to his credit, Eric Dane is really giving it his all. His character was a little flat in season 1, but now that he has more material to work with, he's proving himself an extremely capable actor. Petition for this guy to play an old Joker if we ever get a live-action Dark Knight Returns. And don't you dare compare those two in the comments, I swear to God. Rue has joined Jules and Elliot. They have some weird and highly uncomfortable back and forth physical dares before Elliot suggests they steal some liquor. Really, Jules? You aren't gonna say anything? I'm not saying you need to be responsible for other people's addictions or afflictions, but at the same time, I wouldn't take a friend with a peanut allergy to the Texas Roadhouse. There's being responsible for yourself, and then there's throwing your friends in harm's way. But nope, to the liquor store we go. Then after all this, we finally cut back to Maddie's birthday party. Cassie learns Nate is still coming from BB and drinks by herself. Please give us more BB, Sam. Give the people what they want. Then Kat talks with Maddie about how Ethan is great, but they aren't really compatible. Honestly, this is probably the most likable Kat-driven scene this season, and it's 54 seconds long. That's not an exaggeration, I counted. Probably because Barbie just wanted to go home. And back to the liquor store. I'm so glad we cut away for all of 80 seconds. Elliot insults the cashier and knocks some crap over to cause a distraction. This lets Jules swipe some alcohol and then they dip. Do Elliot and Jules know what liquor is? Jules doesn't even look for liquor, she just bum rushes for the White Claws. With the shots we see, this is clearly not a liquor store.
Objection!
Hi everyone. Peanut Gallery from Post here to announce that I was actually completely wrong when I wrote this. There is liquor in this store. It's just behind the counter. So we can reasonably infer that this is why the characters would opt to steal the White Claws instead. And for product placement, but you know, whatever. Full props to this scene for actually showing and not telling. They far surpassed my expectations for this season, and I will give them a singular, good noodle star for this. Trust me, it isn't going to mean much in the grand scheme of this assessment. Nate comes to the party. Cassie lets him in. Moving on. Cal gets into his car. Wait, what is the continuity here? So Cal told Nate he was going for a drive, and then he spent so long dicking around inside their own home that Nate had time to drive over to Maddie's? What, was he jerking off? Did he lose his keys? I have a feeling the script wants to imply one kind of chronology, but boy is the editing working against it. This is why the order in which you intercut matters. So Cal drives down the road drunk as a skunk. Now, attentive viewers will remember that Elliot's car is also on the road. Oh shit. Are they gonna do it? Are they finally gonna pay something off? Are we going to get some real drama? Okay. In fairness, it would be a little dumb and incidental if they did collide. But it's also equally dumb that Cal drives this recklessly and hits literally no one, so you know what? Damned if you do, damned if you don't, and I for one would like this show to stop blueballing me and introduce some real drama already. So Jules catches Rue drinking in the back of the car, she reprimands her, Rue says some nasty shit back.
Because I can't stand you.
And then she steps out of the car and I guess walks home in one piece. Doesn't really look like she's anywhere near home, but it, whatever. Meanwhile, Nate's arrival prompts Cassie to drink herself into a stupor. She has this embarrassing dancing scene, and I mean that both for Cassie Howard and Sydney Sweeney. I could continually jump around from plotline to plotline like the show does every 5 seconds, but for the sake of everyone's sanity, let's just finish up talking about the party first. Now we get to the hot tub fight. This fight is so dumb. So the reason the fight breaks out is Nate says he and Maddie aren't together. And Maddie thinks he sounded too definitive about it.
But why do you sound so definitive about it?
I just said that. Then she gets on Nate for his tone, even though he made the statement completely neutrally. We continue to hyperfixate on the speed and tone at which Nate delivered the neutral sentence that Maddie was about to say herself. I guess when in doubt, just write the women hyper-irrationally to create some drama in your episode. I know Maddie has always been a petty but was she really this petty? I honestly feel bad for Nate in this scene. That's not a good sign for how your scene is going. After Kat chimes in on Maddie's attempts to corner him conversationally, he says something mildly passive-aggressive back. Madness ensues. Maddie goes into a crazy tirade, but that tirade is cut short by Cassie vomiting all over her. Oh, so the scene was supposed to be funny, I guess. Except it was just really annoying and stupid. Man, Cassie's really giving Jules a run for her money on who can be more unbearable this season. Lame. Back with Cal, he goes to that same bar from the intro of episode 3 where he made out with his best friend. He has this scene where he's dancing with a guy and then that guy becomes his best friend. Oh wow, another fantasy. Just kidding, I actually like this one. It's effective at drawing you into Cal's world and emotions. And unlike this, or this, it doesn't feel obnoxious. Nor does it feel like it was done to give the audience an impression of something happening. Because here, something is happening. Cal is coming to terms with this side of himself and deciding he can no longer live a lie. When he says, "I thought I lost you," it's not an entirely literal line. And what we are seeing is obviously not an entirely literal image. It's clever. I'm not sure I've used that word once in describing season 2 so far, but there you go. 1 point for Sam. So Cal comes out of his imagination and tries to wrestle the dude he was dancing with to the ground. The bouncer kicks him out and bans him. Cal continues to drunkenly laugh and ramble. It's entertaining, it advances the character, it's great. But unfortunately, we can't stay here. Custer comes back and tells Fez that people are looking for Mouse and his partner. Then the scene ends. Jules goes home with Elliot. She uses his shower, turns off her phone, takes his clothes, and then hops into bed with him. But mid-makeout, Elliot's conscience comes over him. Not to forego sleeping with Jules. No. He's gonna do that, don't worry, guys. Just to tell her the truth about Rue's sobriety. Jules is shocked. So wait, the guy who looks like he does drugs and does drugs around me and was randomly with my partner before I knew him was actually doing drugs with my addict partner who I saw doing drugs at the beginning of the season? What a betrayal. Who would have seen it coming? Meanwhile, Rue gets really high on her own. And holy shit, this is actually amazing. This is an example of great sound design and editing. Awesome. Then Rue gets up and walks into a church where Labyrinth is singing a thematically appropriate song. This is one of the first songs this season which has any kind of identity or memorability to it. Rue hugs Labyrinth, who at some point becomes her father. She mourns his death in his arms. Then we cut to a wide shot of her swaying alone. So yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this is better than most things in Season 1. I've complained about unnecessary and distracting stylization before, but this really is anything but. The song, imagery, and dialogue lets us know Rue is close to death. The abrupt cut to the reality of her dancing alone shows us that although Rue thinks drugs are taking her closer to her father, she is, in reality, alone. For those of us who don't believe in an afterlife, like Rue, death is inherently lonely. The scene shows us that no matter how much we may delude ourselves, even if we picture this, what we really get is this. The intent and purpose here is what separates this scene from the ones I complained about. These stylistic decisions don't exist in place of the narrative, they exist to enhance the narrative. And holy shit, I haven't even really discussed what Rue says in this scene, or how the quality of Zendaya's performance suddenly skyrockets to another stratosphere. Yeah, I'm definitely not getting teary-eyed over here or anything. Then we come back to Cal, and this is actually another really great scene. He comes home, pulls his dick out, pisses on the floor, and then leaves his dick out. Cal proceeds to brag to his entire family about the many men he's f***ed. He then digs into the rest of his family, accusing them of their own secrets and disturbed fetishes. This scene is both genuinely hilarious and deeply sad, and in a lot of different ways. There's something really sad about a closeted guy having to hide that fact from his family, and it's also really sad to watch him blow up and disregard them. But also, the shit he says is absurd and hysterical.
You know what you three assholes are looking at? The man with no name. Because I'm a man. I'm an animal. I'm a Rottweiler. I'll men.
Don't say that!
I'll women.
Don't say that! Don't say that!
And I'll have a mighty fine time doing it. I eat what I kill.
At the end of his monologue, Cal takes a family photo and dips, leaving his family presumably forever. So yeah, really great stuff. To think a scene this funny could follow one this heart-wrenching and still be tonally effective. That's the kind of shit you can only pull off with a really well-written script and a really well-done edit. These two scenes back-to-back feel like Euphoria Season 1 in that way. How much do you want to bet someone was annoyed that this whole scene just had to play out without cutting to 5 other plot lines? But how can we trust the audience to watch the scene if we stay on it for more than 3 seconds? But in all seriousness, both these scenes are great. Then the episode keeps going for 5 minutes where we cut around to everyone, and I really don't know why.
I really wanted to allow for this certain kind of mystery inside the characters to sort of be alive. It became a way for us to sort of to be inside of their worlds without having to break down everything on a logical level.
Okay, I can kind of see what you were going for, but by your own logic, this doesn't really hold up. Like, whose world is this construction site? Which leads me to gripe number 1. Right after learning people are looking for Mouse, we cut from the construction zone to Fez. To me, the edit implied a connection between Fez and the construction project. And keep in mind, the last scene we saw with Fez before this was him talking about where Mouse and his partner were. I expected then that maybe Nate and Cassie would stumble across the bodies of Mouse and his partner when there, and that would give Nate new leverage over Fez, complicating the triangular war between him, Fez, and Team Rules. But no, it's a nothing burger. We never even go back to the construction site. I have no idea why this is here. Then the imagery gets even more confusing. Rue keeps repeating, "I love you," and says, "I've always been with you," and we're shown an image of Jules. What? Is this like harkening back to Rue's similarities with Jules' mom? Being like someone and being their reincarnation are not the same f***ing thing. Also, who is Rue talking to right now? Her narration is for the audience, right? Is she talking to us? What? Then one of these lines plays over an image of Elliot. Then Jules finishes it by saying,
"Since before we ever existed."
What in the world is going on? Why does Jules get to narrate now? You know, in film, there's this whole concept of not establishing a language you won't return to, and setting up a language that you keep consistent. So why in the did we just break it for no reason. This feels artsy the way a film student would try to be artsy. You know, because it sounds vaguely cool, but it makes no sense and breaks all the rules the narrative established and the rules of cinema that it's going by, and the universe just falls apart. Is this a shonen?
And now, this world shall know pain.
No, don't take me back there. No, I don't want to hear about more of those rules broken. No, not the reincarnation. Not that anymore. Stop. I said stop. Okay, also anything with the Izanami. Izanami. Why are the dead people back? What is going on? I'm done. I've moved on. I've moved on from this. I said I'm not going back there. Oh wait, the episode ended. So it was around this point in my first viewing of the season where I had a bit of a nagging question. I was not yet aware of the supposed drama behind the scenes between Zendaya, Schaefer, and Elordi, so instead, when watching the credits to episode 4, my brain hatched an entirely different story. For those of you who have never watched the credits and aren't aware, Euphoria is technically an adaptation of an Israeli show by the same name. After discovering that the show ran for a single season, I was curious if the difference in quality between seasons could merely be explained by a strong blueprint existing for season 1 and no blueprint for season 2. So after many hours spent scouring the internet, I was able to track down and watch the original Euphoria. Hence, I can say with the utmost confidence, these shows are absolutely nothing alike. Here are the similarities I found between this and the original Euphoria. There are two characters who are analogs for Rue and Kat who have somewhat similar arcs. Sometimes. Teens do drugs and the sex. There is a narrator in both shows, but instead of it being Rue in the Israeli version, it's actually just this guy who lives with Rue and sleeps on the couch the entire time. He spends the series fantasizing about some trip to South America with his dead friend. We find out he's dead and none of this is real and none of it matters halfway through the show, but the dreams keep going for some odd reason I still don't understand. Anyway, both opening monologues mention 9/11. And that's it. No, really, that's it. Israeli Euphoria has some f***ing crazy shit in it. Made up synthetic drugs. A man performs brain surgery on himself to remove his ability to fear. Someone is murdered on a live stream. This one is so much more bizarre and Here's an example. Let's run down Israeli Kat's storyline. Hers is the most comparable to anything that happens in the American Euphoria. So Kat's character starts out with a sort of similar arc. She's an overweight girl who gets laid and then goes on a huge sexual awakening where she finds herself. Sounds similar enough, right? But in this show, her awakening is brought on by advice she gets from this dude in his 20s who likes to hang out in his underwear. And so she it up for a bit. But then she gets HIV. And she blames him for her HIV. So she decides to go to his house, drug his orange juice, paralyze him, kiss him, and I swear with the way it was edited, I thought she might have raped him and given him AIDS off screen, but it turns out she just caresses his lips and then leaves. But I fully believe her character intended to rape him before coming to her senses. In retaliation, that dude tracks her down and slaps her in the face. Then an episode later, they're best friends. So the lesson is if someone tries to rape you and give you AIDS, just slap him in the face and then you can be best friends. So if you couldn't tell, the show is exactly like American Euphoria. After seeing this poster, I was expecting a shitty teen soap drama. And I can actually say, the show did surprise me with its level of merit and artistic intent. There were some moments which really impressed me. There's a really great oneer where a character goes from calm to freaking out, some decent-ish music, fun artistic decisions. There's this interesting thing where the parents are never shown and Charlie Brown out of the story. And sometimes people give good performances. Sometimes. Have you ever seen someone jerk off like this? What the f*** is this? And in some ways, the show improves as it goes along. The first 3 episodes are literally just people using drugs, talking about sex, or using sex. That's literally every scene. but unfortunately, I felt its conclusion left a lot to be desired. So do I recommend this show?
No.
Absolutely not. Do you know how difficult this was to track down? If this shows up on HBO Max one day and you're bored, it's mildly interesting enough to have on. But holy shit, it is not worth seeking out. I would not have finished this show if not for making this video. So in case anyone out there had the same intrusive thought as me, I can safely say that any conversations about the quality of American Euphoria can leave out mentioning the original Euphoria. The case for Sam grows more complicated. Now we come to Season 2, Episode 5, Stand Still Like the Hummingbird. And you know what? It's really good. It's not perfect. There's some contrivances which get annoying, but for the most part it is genuinely great. Why? Let's dive in, shall we? The episode begins with no flashback this time. We hear an off-camera argument about Rue's drug use between Rue and her mom. Rue insists she's only smoking weed and keeps a calm demeanor, until...
Jules told me everything.
Great shot. Rue then discovers her suitcase is missing. From here, Zendaya gives the performance of her career. In the space of a few minutes, we watch her go from defensively aloof to aggressively enraged to deeply regretful. I know I was critical of Zendaya earlier in the video, but for this episode alone, I'm fine with any acting award she receives for the season, because this level of heightened dramatic acting is better than most performances. Rue's tirade continues down this sad and desperate path as she tears up the house, looking for the suitcase. But then...
What did you do with them? We flushed them down the toilet.
Oof. Ain't that a hard way to learn a lesson? Admittedly, this is a little silly as far as setups go. It sure is convenient Rue contained a rampage to this side of the house. But in fairness, even if she had come in earlier, it wouldn't have changed a ton about the outcome of the scene. It just may have had a different emotional arc for Rue. Rue comes in and curses out Jules, saying they are officially through. All Jules can say is that she loves her. I mean, like, God, this scene is so good. Why did it have to be preceded by all of this? Just imagine how much harder this scene would hit if Jules hadn't cheated. And this scene is already hitting like the Raikage's Liger bomb.
Oh, now you wanna cry.
Gonna cry?
Rue then brings up how Jules leaving her spurred her relapse in the first place. Oh my god, we finally remembered that whole theme from Season 1. Do you remember your problems with Rue yet, Jules? The audience didn't forget. So Rue tells Jules to get out of her life. It's heartbreaking. Then this dickwad chimes in saying he liked Rue the way she was. Look, I understand this line was in Elliot's character, but like, is now the time? Did he need to be here? Rue's mom doesn't even know him. Who let him in here? So Rue hops in her mom's car and part of Season 1's soundtrack is used appropriately. She confesses some dark stuff. Her mom seems to be largely ignoring her until Rue snaps and realizes she does not want to go back to rehab. She steps out of a car at a traffic light and sprints across a busy highway. The rest of the episode is following Rue from place to place. Her first major stop is the Howard household, where all the girls are hanging out. Rue tries to use the bathroom to get some drugs. Of course, she doesn't say that aloud, but Lexi's mom isn't that stupid. She calls Rue's mom to come and retrieve her, and a mini intervention ensues. Cassie says something that feels in character for the first time this season.
Just take it one day at a time.
But then Rue turns that kindness straight on her head.
How long have you been Nate Jacobs?
Oh shit. Now we got some drama. And not some bullshit no consequence drama that goes nowhere. I'm not gonna lie, when I first watched this scene, this was not at all how I envisioned it going. But it's pretty genius on Rue's part. She basically chucks a grenade into the room, and what was once a calm intervention has morphed into total chaos. It's pretty rare to see Rue and the rest of the crew interacting in one room like this, let alone in a way that intertwines all their drama. And all the actors put on great performances to make this come to life. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, even if I'm still not a fan of Cassie and Nate, it's hard to pretend that this isn't an interesting and satisfying payoff to that thread. Rue uses this chaos to sneak out. From here, I'm just gonna blitz through all her stops before the final one. She goes to Fez and tries to take his grandma's pills. Fez forcibly kicks her out on principle. Rue then goes around robbing homes to get some money. She gets caught, but ultimately escapes their grasp. Then later, she runs into and subsequently away from some cops. And like shit, there's actually a pretty memorable piece of music. It's not as great as season 1, but I remember how it sounds. Can't say that much about any of the other non-lyrical tracks this season. While the chase from the cops is entertaining and funny, I do think it is pushing the suspension of disbelief a little too far. The idea that someone would evade a police chase this long and through this many backyards is pretty cartoonish. Not that cartoonish is inherently a bad thing, but with the level of realism this episode is otherwise striving for in its tense character-driven scenes, it does feel out of place. I'm gonna move on from this in a second, but there is one last thing I really can't help but mention. Watch this clip. One more time. When I rewatched this, I could not believe they used that sound effect. That's the cheap, canned, ubiquitous stock sound effect you would see nowadays as a joke. Like something on the Eric Andre show.
What's that say?
Look here, with the most minor amount of Googling, I was able to find it. You couldn't just record a group of people gasping? Really? So eventually, Rue evades the cops and finds her way to Laurie's apartment. Rue tries to give her the stolen valuables to make up for the money lost by the suitcase. And Laurie points out that this is nowhere near enough money to cover the amount she's owed. Laurie then eerily goes through her own history with addiction and how horrible it was to be in withdrawal. To cut to the chase, she persuades Rue to take morphine, and then lets her know she will get her money's worth out of Rue, one way or another. We then see a flashback of Rue speaking at her dad's funeral. It is gut-wrenchingly sad, and the speech Rue gives is genuinely beautiful. If there were ever a way to discuss death that feels simultaneously agnostic and spiritual, this is it. It balances honesty with hope, providing a path to process grief. The flashback ends and we cut to when Rue wakes up. So, here's the part I was least looking forward to discussing. Although I've tried to avoid bringing up events later in the season than the point at which I am currently discussing, this can't wait. We gotta do it. So please, just bear with me on this one. Rue wakes up in different clothes. She also has multiple IV marks. And then there's a random man asleep on the couch.
Rue, if you screw me, I'll have you kidnapped and sold to some real sick people.
The visual implication is that Rue was while she was sleeping. Many people online seem to be confused about this, and I don't blame them. I want to make it clear up front that I'm in no way implying Euphoria needed an on-camera rape scene. I do not believe that would be necessary. In fact, I think the way it was handled in this episode was both highly responsible and easily interpretable. But after finishing the season, I initially joined the choir in saying, but wait, was she assaulted? Because this is never mentioned again. If someone is gonna be assaulted, there should be some consequences in the plot. This should affect the character in some way, as it would no doubt traumatize and affect anyone in real life. So why on earth does this horrifying event that befalls Rue never even get hinted at again? In what world does someone get and it never adversely affects their life? You find me one person where this is credibly and honestly the case. That's the reason people are so confused by this. It's not how it's portrayed, it's how it's forgotten. Sure, in the confines of this episode, I think they handled the topic responsibly. But if you're going to forgo addressing something this traumatizing and life-altering, then you're probably better off just never even implying it in the first place. In before someone comments, but what if they address it comprehensively in a later season? That's fine. That could even be great. But you can't leave the audience with zero hints that this is negatively impacting her until we get to that point. In Berserk, one of the main characters gets assaulted early on. And although it takes about 70 chapters before we watch that character truly confront the consequences of this event, there are still plenty of minor hints which show how it altered their life. Something as minor as a character refusing to be touched on the shoulder can let the audience know how this event changed them forever. How did Rue change from this? How has being sexually assaulted altered her life or personality? Season 2's answer is that it didn't, and for a show whose spirit is constantly described as empathy by its showrunners,
the spirit of Euphoria is always empathy, to see people from their own eyes.
Being able to see yourself in a character
is a really powerful thing.
I think we should all find that insulting. So Rue stealthily busts out of Lori's and makes it home in one piece. Then she finds the one piece. And yeah, I know I just had a long rant about them dropping the ball with how they handled the events of the episode, but for the most part, that doesn't prevent this episode from being really good. There are some minor hiccups here and there, but it's a highly entertaining and dramatic 54 minutes that advances the plot and characters. It is the glimmer of hope this season. The episode that makes you go, okay, now we can get back on track. So let's go on to episode 6 and see where they take it from here. Episode 6 opens on Rue trying to open a Jolly Rancher during some brutal withdrawal. Rue monologues over this, and it feels closer to a season 1 monologue. The stuff Rue is telling us adds context to what we are seeing rather than being used to cheaply rewrite characters. It's also used for Rue to dig into the philosophy of what she has said, both to her mom and to Ali. It brings up some thought-provoking ideas about the way we treat and perceive others in our lives. Even though it may be pretty forward at times like other monologues this season, it's ultimately in service of digging at something deeper about the characters and life itself. It's pretty good stuff. This all culminates in Rue formally apologizing to Ali over the phone. In response, Ali comes over to cook dinner for the whole family. He pulls Rue's sister aside and tries to figure out how she's feeling, and he tells her it's reasonable to be upset with addicts. We'll come back to this storyline later when the episode decides to, because now we jump to Nate. His household has never looked brighter. He and his mom seem pretty happy that Cal is finally gone, but the older brother isn't, for some reason. We never really find out why, so much like half the shit that happens this season, who cares? Nate then discovers a bunch of missed calls from Cassie and puts together that Maddie knows. At this point, Rue over-explains Maddie's character and Nate's thought process about the whole situation. We all know Maddie is loyal. We all know she's devious. We've had the disc mentioned on 3 different occasions this season. I think everyone can put together where this is going. Maddie then calls Kat, and Barbie gives the most limp dick performance ever.
Look, I never trusted her.
What? Why?
Because she seems like the kind of person who would your boyfriend.
Because she seems like the kind of person who would her boyfriend.
Like a grisly murder. One that shocks the nation.
I think that's more than understandable.
I think that's more than understandable. She's really phoning it in here. This was probably the point she really just gave up and knew she wasn't coming back. And if this wasn't bad enough for Barbie and her character, we then cut from this phone conversation to the single most embarrassing scene in Euphoria. And this is a show where people often have their titties and dinglings out loud and proud. But I contend that this scene is more embarrassing. The scene begins with a waitress coming over to Ethan telling him that customers can't use phones at the table. What? Is this like a traditional Chinese restaurant thing? I have been to many a restaurant, and I have never once witnessed a waiter come over and tell someone to get off their phone. Really bizarre. Then Kat gets off the phone to have this immaculately written conversation with Ethan. So, her excuse for breaking up with him is...
I have a brain disorder.
What? What in the world?
I think it's terminal.
So that's a yes for me.
Is this supposed to be funny? It's not a good joke. It also doesn't feel like an excuse an awkward person would invent to break up with someone. So much like the befuddled audience, Ethan calls bullshit, and then Kat gets offended by Ethan questioning her honesty. Oh boy. I know people complain about this show being misogynistic for its nudity, but I personally think this kind of scene is way worse. Whenever you need some drama, just write the women irrationally. Right, fellas? That's how women are.
He doesn't give her that rise, that like camming websites or exploring like casual sex. I think that's really what she's battling this entire season is like a really internal fight.
If someone says the word internal one more time, I'm going to throw up. So Kat is gaslighting the only pure-hearted and easily likable character on this show. She literally calls him an incel to his face. Yeah, Sam, that's definitely going to get people to like this character. It definitely won't irritate everyone. Needless to say, these two break up. Kat seems to have some regrets about it, but her character was cut, so who cares? Moving on. Lexi's mom tells her to hide the knives so Cassie doesn't do anything brash. And then we cut to Lexi and Fez hanging out. Okay, so we're all thinking it, right? Where were the scenes of them before this? We had that scene in episode 1, she went to the convenience store in episode 2, and then we forgot about this until right now. Kinda bizarre writing decision. Well, it turns out it wasn't always this way. We'll explore why in a bit. For now, just understand that this is a really jarring leap to make in their relationship after seeing nothing. Last we saw them, she said hi to him in the convenience store, and now they're hanging out one-on-one at her house. We don't even see either of them ask to hang out with the other. I too skip texting a girl after I get her number and jump straight to us chillin' and watching a Stephen King movie. So Lexi voices anxieties about her play and whose feelings it may hurt. Fez reassures her that it's probably alright. Then they watch Stand By Me. Jump to Nate in the kitchen with his mommy. He's drinking whiskey. She's drinking wine. Nate's mother remarks on how angry he is as a person. Then the scene intercuts to Cassie, and we keep going back and forth between Nate and Cassie. In defense of the editing this time, it does feel like they are trying to establish a clear parallel between the two's relationships with their parents, as opposed to feeling unnecessarily disjointed or manipulative. But since it's easier to explain if I just talk about each scene individually, that's what we're gonna do. Nate and his mom ran about Maddie, and she admits that she was proud of Nate when he dragged Maddie away at the fair. This family's so Nate gets defensive when his mom insists that he choked her. Then she insists that she could tell Nate knew Cal was cheating. She makes some remark about getting back in the game, and Nate tells her to become more mature. Then she delivers a pretty brutal blow.
Why is it that you only have the bad qualities of your father and none of the good qualities?
And then it gets worse.
He's deeply flawed, and somehow, some way, we raised a child who's even more deeply flawed.
She tells an anecdote about how Nate used to be a sweet boy. I don't entirely know how I feel about this scene. I think I like it. It definitely feels out of nowhere, but I guess that's how it probably would be if your insane father suddenly left the family. And Nate's mom is an underdeveloped character up to now, so it's good to get a little more insight into her. So we'll say this scene is a net positive, even if it does end up used for rather nefarious narrative purposes later. So on the opposite end of the edit, Cassie is being an insufferable bitch. She tries to win her family's support, and yeah, they're not giving it to her. Then she tries to cut herself with a corkscrew.
I just want to die.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's just really funny. And deeply sad. Lexi then points out how illogical Cassie liking Nate is, and she presents a really convincing argument.
I thought you hated Nate.
When I didn't know him.
You've literally known him forever.
Not like I do now.
Oh yeah, this would win over a jury in court. Then Lexi puts 2 and 2 together to make 4, as then she ascertains the reason Cassie ratted out Fez was for Nate. This leads to another bickering session where Lexi is clearly in the right and Cassie is unambiguously in the wrong.
God, Lexi, you're making me feel worse!
She was not this annoying in season 1. Why is she like this? Then Cassie insults Rue, which Lexi's mom is not gonna let fly. She brings up valid parallels between their lives, but then makes the mistake of being an unempathetic bitch about it. Well, we went through similar shit, and I didn't do drugs, so she shouldn't either. God. So clearly Cassie is meant to be in the wrong here. This isn't a problem of empathy like with Jules. It's really just a problem of her character going from sweet and sarcastic to loud, cruel, and insufferable. It's a transformation which hardly makes sense and is painfully annoying to watch. Does anyone like this? Does anyone out there enjoy Season 2's version of Cassie Howard? I'm genuinely asking. Then Rue narrates to let us know that Nate needs to get the CD to save the face of his family business. Sure, fine, why not? Then he grabs a f***ing gun. Oh shit, we're hitting the tension button again. Rue cuts to Jules and Elliot but decides that she doesn't want to talk about them. We don't hear anything about them for the rest of the season. So if you happen to be one of the 9 people who like Jules and Elliot, you can go f*** yourself and your expectations just like the rest of us. We get some more redundant monologuing about Maddie that's purely about the character's thoughts, which could have easily been shown and not told. Then she talks to the mom of the person who she babysits for, who also slept with her bestie's ex. Again, this is barely paid off, so who cares? But wait, wasn't it raining earlier? But it isn't now? This episode's chronology, in particular, is really confusing and bizarre. Because now we're back to the rain where Lexi and Fez finish Stand By Me and sing together. How adorable. Don't mind the fact that we skipped all the development of this relationship. Just see how cute Agnes and Maud are together and don't think about it. Then we pan over to Faye taking out the trash and talking to Custer, who emerges from an alley. He essentially tells us that Fez is going to get blamed for Mouse's death soon, and that Faye should keep out of the drama as much as possible. Then finally, we get to the main event. Maddie comes home, and much like with Tyler, Nate is waiting in the room. Okay, so I know what they were trying to do with this shot. Put Nate in the corner, allow his presence to build tension as the audience slowly notices him. It's a fun directing trick. And while it's neat framing, its proportions with respect to its duration are wrong. Because with how big he is in the frame, how well it's lit, and how unhidden he is, you notice him in about 2 seconds. And then the shot carries on for a full 45 seconds while we watch Maddie get changed. If the shot was going to be this long, he should have been better obscured. Have it come as a reward for looking around the frame. Or maybe he should have come through the window mid-scene. That'd create an interesting split screen to watch. As it is, the shot goes on too long for what it's trying. Now, this isn't distractingly bad stylization or anything. The show has certainly done and will do way worse. If you like this shot, I don't blame you. But all I can say is, man, if only there were like a blueprint thing that helped you decide how to frame things, maybe then you would have been able to get this shot a little closer to your intentions. So Nate cocks the gun to scare Maddie. He says, "It's over," and then proceeds to wave the gun and walk around the room. He quietly inquires about the missing CD. So far, this feels like a return to form for the character of Nate. He feels properly quiet, intimidating, and scary like he did in Season 1. Although I can't help but mention just how weird the soundtrack is here. What a strange choice for this scene. Nate holds the gun to Maddie's head, demanding she turn over the disc. Then he points the gun at himself and pulls the trigger, but nothing happens. Maddie cries and tells Nate the disc is in her purse. Wait, this bitch carries that around? You know, if I was holding on to someone's child's cheese pizza as blackmail, the last place I'd keep it is on my physical person at all times. What if she just gave her purse to Kat one day because she needed to borrow a tampon, and then the disc fell out and she watched it and was like, oh, Or what if she just dropped it in public and someone took it out and watched it? I don't know if these two scenarios are the most realistic, but you gotta admit, you probably shouldn't leave the house with anything highly illegal that you don't need at that exact moment. You know how the saying goes, rather not have it and need it than have it and become a registered sex offender for life. So Nate grabs the CD from her purse and tries to apologize, claiming there were no bullets in the gun and he was joking. Real doozy you got there, Nate. Hey Sam, maybe that wasn't the time for a joke. Have you ever got your hearing checked to see if you are tone deaf? Nate drives over to Jules and tells her that they need to talk about Cal. So now these two are in a scene for the first and only time all season, and it's framed in a way where we can only see the back of each of their heads from Jules' shot. Is it a double? Okay guys, that was a joke. In all sincerity, I do think Elordi and Schaefer filmed this scene together. Does this dispel all the rumors of behind-the-scenes drama? Not really. It's a pretty small and easy to shoot scene. I could see Sam insisting that even if their drama was no longer going to be the focus of the plot line, it at least needed some kind of resolution, even if an underbaked and unsatisfying one. But we've talked enough about that supposed drama. Let's just return to the scene. Nate apologizes for everything he did to Jules, remarking on how he was trying to protect someone that didn't deserve it. Then he tells Jules that he knew about the relationship she had with his father because of the sex tape. Oh yeah, I guess Jules never was aware of how Nate knew that, and probably thought that he and his father had a different kind of f***ed up relationship. Nate then returns the disc to Jules, letting her decide what to do with it. When Jules asks why she's doing this, Nate says,
Honestly, the answer is too stupid and simple. It's better if we just keep it a mystery.
So yeah. Nate then tells Jules that everything he ever said was true, and she responds igualmente. I don't hate this scene or anything, but it does feel disappointing. I'm not against Nate having a redemption arc in the long run, nor am I against him and Jules coming to some kind of apology or atonement, but damn, all I can do is watch this scene and think about all the drama we could have explored instead. These two have such a fascinating relationship, and we didn't dive into it at all. Instead, we get this whimper of an ending to their conflict. And beyond what could have been for both of them, as we've already gone down that rabbit hole, This scene feels too early in the storyline. I don't think I can buy that Nate would suddenly try and do nice things. Just 2 episodes ago, he was having a meltdown on Cassie. Having him hand the disc over and trying to patch things with Jules is a pretty massive big deed that feels insufficiently justified. He needed more time to try and be a better person before doing this. He's putting the fate of his family's business in jeopardy just to try and do the right thing for someone who will always hate and never forgive him. Prior to this episode, on what planet would Nate have ever done that? If the idea was to build up Nate into a better person this season, he probably shouldn't have spent it f***ing his ex's best friend. And his best friend's ex. That's not going to convince the audience they are watching a moral and conscientious member of society. He probably should have spent it deep in introspection, analyzing his relationships with his father and everyone else. Then he could realize how lonely and angry he is, and slowly try to better himself. Instead, his mom says he used to be a nice kid, and now he suddenly decides to do a good deed the same day. That's it, guys? Really? Nate is not your average jerk. If you want the audience to believe he's trying to be better, we need more than an average reality check. We need a f***ing overhaul. While this scene on its own is fine, or maybe even good, when you start to consider it in the bigger picture, it falls apart. This is partially what I meant in the beginning by the season feeling like a f***ing mess of good ideas that are improperly combined in the wrong order. This scene could be really good with a different script preceding it, and these scenes could be really great with a different script following it. And some of these scenes could be really good if they weren't edited to bits and lost all sense of progression.
It's a very creative environment. I think we're given a lot of freedom to take all these pieces and then to play with it.
Yeah, maybe a little too much freedom if you ask me. Have we come far enough where everyone can see my point? Do we understand why this video is as long as it is? The show is not bad in a simple way. It's bad in a pretty complicated and difficult to explain way. And that's only going to be more true when we get to that goddamn play. But let's refrain from tangenting on that and resolve our business here. Nate tells Cassie she can stay at his place. Why? I'm still not entirely sure, really. I don't know if this is him thinking he's doing a good thing, or it's him submitting to doing a bad thing again. Well, I guess I do prefer it to Rue over-explaining why he's doing this, so we'll give it a pass. A weird, strange pass. Cassie packs her shit and no one stops her. She makes this weird face towards Mrs. Jacobs before going into Nate's room. Then she says she ruined her entire life for Nate, and you're just gonna need to see this to believe it.
Stay and live a life here with me.
Oh my god, this is the worst ever. Well, I didn't think it was possible, but somehow Sydney Sweeney might have a more embarrassing scene this episode than Barbie Ferreira. Oh, who am I kidding? Barbie's was worse. But this scene isn't exactly something I'd be proud of either. Finally, we're back to Rue. She states her intentions to go to rehab and finally takes sobriety seriously for herself. Her sister responds with cruel indifference. Ollie reassures her that it's reasonable to lose faith and that her emotions are valid. Ollie then pulls the mom aside and says that at this point, Rue's struggle is her own and she should instead turn her attention to Gia. Gia and Rue sleep in the same bed together, but then the mom discovers that there isn't an available spot for Rue in rehab. Oh shit, she's going at this on her own. Then the episode ends. Good lord, that took a while. Part of the reason is that this episode has a bizarre non-linearity to it. Before you smart mouths say something in the comments, I am not against putting flashbacks into a story. My professed love of Naruto's first 2/3 should be a pretty clear indication of that. But the way this show uses flashbacks and throws events out of order is just jarring and bizarre. Let's focus on the order of Lexi's storyline here to illustrate my point. Lexi is first introduced when her mother tells her to hide the knives in the backyard. Rue tells us that this is giving Lexi doubts about her play, at which point we jump to Fez. The rain outside tells us this is the same day as when Nate talks to his mom, gets the disc, and confronts Jules. Okay, cool, got it. And from Lexi, we cut immediately to that scene of Nate at the counter. But then from here, we go back to the day Lexi hid the knives, and now the counter scene is intercut with Cassie's meltdown. And Lexi is in this scene. So now the audience is keeping track of 2 different Lexis and 2 different time periods. Then we cut to Nate going through the drawer, which is clearly after this, and then to Maddie babysitting, where it isn't raining. So later when she gets home in the rain, I guess that wasn't from babysitting? But this is the only place we've seen her this entire episode. And after Maddie, we're back at Lexi in the house and— Wait. When Ali comes at night, it isn't raining yet. But you can clearly hear it in the background at dinner when Rue is talking later in the episode.
Go to rehab, get clean, sort my shit out.
So this is the same day Nate gets the CD back. But wasn't it raining in the middle of the day earlier? Or do the Jacobs just have constant spotlights trained on their house? Is Rue's house so far from Nate's that he was experiencing a torrential downpour midday while Rue experienced no rain whatsoever hours later at night? Did the rain briefly subside for the 2 minutes in which Ali showed up? Do you see what I'm talking about? Barring you are not making some surrealist masterpiece, even if the events aren't shown in order, you probably want your audience to be able to build a chronology of these events. Who taught you to write, Sam?
My background's in method acting, and I studied method acting for like 4 years and stuff. So I just improvise, and because it feels like there's a gun to my head.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, I was thinking it at one point, and I know you're thinking it too. Was season 1 a fluke? Is Sam actually just an incompetent writer who got lucky? Let's assess the evidence, shall we? Sam has 2 main directing credits to his name outside of Euphoria: Assassination Nation and Malcolm and Marie. Assassination Nation predates Euphoria, and Malcolm and Marie came out mid-pandemic around the same time as the specials. Let's start with Assassination Nation. Assassination Nation is a quirky, campy black comedy about the chaos that engulfs a town and a group of teenagers after everyone's phones get leaked. The film has a lot of mixed reception and has not been a financial success. The consensus seems to be that while it is a highly stylized and memorable film, it's pretentious and insensitive. As far as sensitivity goes, that's really a matter of taste. You either find this kind of absurdity funny or you don't. I don't blame you if you don't, but I certainly do.
It's bad luck. I've just been trying to fix it. Of course, it's when I'm already 10 minutes late for my tutorial.
The other accusation, that people find this film to be pretentious, I find to be unfounded. I don't think the film is anything particularly deep to say, but I never really saw the film as trying to either. I mean, come on, did we watch the same ending?
Why would you do something like this?
I don't know. For the lulz.
That was clearly a punchline and not a political statement. If it isn't apparent, I enjoyed this film quite a bit. It's not going to be on a list with my favorite movies of all time, but for what it is and what it was trying to be, I thought it was pretty good. To me, this film is akin to a Euphoria prototype. Like Euphoria, this is a drama centered on teens. It's full of teen dialogue and teen problems. It has a similar visual presentation to Euphoria, packed full of moving cinematography, bold colors, and expressive editing. There are a lot of similar themes and ideas, but one of them takes an absurdist approach and the other takes a more grounded approach. So based on this, I'd say Sam is clearly a competent director. And he's a good writer. Not a great writer, but a good one. And the thing about good writers is, they don't always hit the mark. Which brings us to Malcolm and Marie. Oh god, why? Malcolm and Marie follows a director and his spouse's argument after the night of his big film premiere. They argue about credit, critics, how much of your life to put into your movies, and who has the right to tell what stories. Then the argument ends. That's it. No, really, that's the whole movie. For context, this movie was filmed and released over the pandemic, so obviously options were limited. From a broad production standpoint, it feels similar to those Euphoria specials, where the whole thing is mostly just people sitting in a room, talking. Sam proved twice over that he could do this, but prove it over thrice he did not. In fairness, this movie starts on a strong foot. I'd say the first 20 to 40 minutes are all interesting enough. And then it keeps going. And going. And going. And going.
It goes, 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 guilty!
This movie is way too long for its premise. And there is something insidious about it. Okay, insidious is an exaggeration, but it somehow feels honest and spiteful. So if you remember what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Sam wrote Euphoria from his own experiences, partially spurred on by the programming head at HBO. I'm afraid he might have taken that lesson a little too far, because this...
You fought to make the movie, to make it the way you wanted to make it, so why didn't you fight for me?
This is embarrassing. Did you seriously write a movie as a vehicle to complain about critics?
But my f***ing problem with her before she even wrote this dumb bitch she ass review is the same after reading this cocksucking mother dog review.
Like, why? This is just whiny and so embarrassing. Wait, actually, does that mean Sam may one day write a movie about... I changed my mind. Sam, this was awesome. Keep doing this, please. My ego depends on it. For those of you who want to know more, I'll just say that many of the details of Malcolm and Marie were based on things that Sam did in his life. I'll leave you to your own devices to research that if you're interested. The main takeaway I want to put out here, though, is yet again we see a sharp difference between the Sam Levinson who made Euphoria Season 1 and the one who made Euphoria Season 2. Whereas Season 1 Sam seems open-minded to his cast, visually driven, expertly planned, and an overall humble guy, Season 2 Sam is apparently a control freak who doesn't listen to his actors, doesn't make shot lists, and feels the need to make a movie bashing media critics. Which one is closer to the truth? I guess that's up to you to decide. But before you go forming your own opinions based on the evidence I have presented, I'm going to implore you to listen to mine for just a little bit longer. Because now we come to the 2 episodes which took everything Season 2 could have possibly been and threw it in the dumpster. Here we are, guys. The epic 2-parter. The editing travesty. The confounding screenwriting abomination. Ladies and gentlemen, non-binaries, and anyone else I may have missed, I present to you the play.
Keep putting on the play.
So if this season is a mess that has good and bad things which leave me unsure how to feel, then the play is a cluster of good, okay, and insufferable things that leave me unsure how to feel. But by the end, mostly pissed off. So the episode begins with Lexi looking in a mirror prior to her play, and then it jumps back in time to Mr. Bennett's funeral. Rue is by herself getting high, and Lexi tries to comfort her by reading a poem. And then mid-shot, we zoom out to reveal we are watching a play. Don't get me wrong, this is a cool transition, and most of the other transitions which happen in this episode are neat. I am not denying that there must have been a lot of effort put in to blend and coordinate these shots. On a moment-to-moment level, the editing is really, really impressive. My issues are more at the broader storytelling level, which is about to become apparent. So after the drug scene, Lexi introduces the title of the play, and everyone in the audience realizes it's about them. Well, except for Jules, of course, who wasn't in the picture until recently. The opening title comes up, and it's like the episode is speed-running how fast it can piss me off.
For the last few months, Lexi had been talking to Fezco every day.
Oh, she has? Maybe I should have, I don't know, seen them talking in the earlier episodes? Show, don't, tell. Hey, would it shock any of you to learn that this conversation was originally not meant to be here?
A big focus with 207 was making it feel like Lexi's episode and tracking her emotional state. And once we started putting the episode together, we realized we had this phone call between Fez and Lexi from 204 that didn't fit in the episode.
You do have choices. You just have to own up to the consequences of them.
In editorial, we had the idea of like, what if we interweave this phone call in 207?
It opened up a whole realm because that was the emotional through line we needed for the episode.
Look, I hear what the editing team is saying here. I get it. If I was an editor on this show, and this scene didn't make it into the 4th episode, I would also probably put it here. That said, there is one thing I cannot stress enough.
Emotions take time.
Throughout most of the season, we have glossed over this developing relationship. You can't just shove all their scenes together now and expect the audience to care. We need time to watch them come together. In short, the problem isn't that the phone call is here, It's that there's nothing else here. And I have to say, nothing has illuminated my understanding of this season's structure more than this single editing promo.
Don't let logic get in the way of a good story.
On a moment-to-moment level, you can tell these guys really care about their craft and want to try new things. I respect that, even if what they try is really weird and off-putting sometimes. However, I can't help but feel that the editing of each episode, and the whole season really, needed a stronger direction to feel cohesive. It almost feels like they're trying to perfect the little details without focusing on the big picture. It's inverse Ed Wood syndrome.
Nobody will ever notice that. Filmmaking is not about the tiny details, it's about the big picture.
Speaking of terrible writers, let's go back to Lexi's play. We are shown a scene where Lexi reveals that her sister going through puberty was a foundational moment for her, as she hopes when she reaches the same age, she will be just as well endowed. Okay, let's be real for a second. Maud Apatow is hot. And not like normal hot, like Hollywood hot. I know even attractive people can struggle with self-confidence and appearance, especially women, but this trope always strikes me as a little hollow when a really conventionally attractive person is put into the role. I'm not saying people who are hot can't feel this way, but if the moral you are trying to push is that everyone is beautiful no matter what, maybe don't cast an extremely attractive person in the role. What you are saying and what you are doing are diametrically opposed. Admittedly, this is a really specific pet peeve of mine. If this doesn't bother you that much, that's fine. All I'm saying is, it's the 2020s and these big boob beauty standards are not as stringent as they used to be. Is it too much to ask that if we are going to tell a story about finding inner beauty, we direct that story towards people who might need it a lot more? Oh god, where was I? This review is off the rails. Now I have no direction. Someone take me away from Adobe Premiere before it's too late. So after Maud theorizes about her own boobs, we cut to Fez getting ready for Lexi's play. For 5 seconds. Then back to the play. We see Lexi behind the scenes being a power-hungry hard-ass. It's actually pretty fun to see this high-on-power side of the otherwise sweet and innocent Lexi. I approve. Then we're immediately back to Faye helping Fez get ready and wait. Is that helpless child playing?
Yes. You the best.
Okay, it isn't, but they do sound kind of similar at first when they're softly played in the background.
Yes. You the best.
And I'll admit, this is also not a bad piece of music. It isn't season 1 good, but I remember this way more than everything else lyricless from the soundtrack. And then it goes into this quiet, intense piece of music, which I also really like. Then back to the play, we get this scene that just has me like, what? So Lexi walks around on this moving stage explaining that she fantasized about being the manic pixie dream girl of the whole school who would never give out the cookie. First of all, I have been in wealthy private schools known for their theater productions. I have never seen a high school auditorium with a rotating stage built into it. That's not even getting into the budget and coordination of all these props. Do you know how heavy lockers are? Who moved them here? I understand in order to get clean edits between the real world and the play, you need well-dressed sets with real props, but I'm sorry, this level of production is just grossly unrealistic for high school.
The fact that it's a play on stage, we can get away with exaggerated, stylized moments. We are trying to rely on a certain kind of realism throughout.
This is real to you? Sir, where on earth did you go to high school? Buckingham Palace? Third of all, what is this scene from the standpoint of a play? Does Sam understand that scenes in plays are more than 30 seconds? Setup done by stage crew is complex and requires shit gets arranged during active scenes. That way, they can efficiently get it all onto stage at a scene's end. That setup usually takes a lot longer than 30 frickin' seconds. Fourth of all, this is already bordering on kinda racy material for a high school play. In just 3 scenes, we've portrayed and discussed drug use, shown a drunk mother, discussed breast size, and talked directly about sexual content. Now, teenagers aren't generally prudes. It makes sense Lexi would write this, but it doesn't make any sense that the school would allow it to be put on, especially when you consider the fact that this is clearly about people who attend said school. I'm pretty sure this play would land someone in the principal's office. We jump to the next scene, and Lexi learns that she will never get boobs bigger than the ones she has. She says that she never wanted to deal with the troubles that came with it, though. Then we cut to Cassie walking down the hallway with Nate, and the hallway is filled with people wearing backpacks at their lockers. Then Maddie says,
"Well, she certainly looks the part."
So wait, this is after the play? No, wait a minute. Everyone's wearing a different outfit, so this clearly must have been a different day. And based on later events, this is before the play happened. Who was she meant to look the part of exactly? So was this like a snippet from some deleted scene or something that they just included 8 seconds of to bridge these two shots together? I think it's probably safe to assume that every editor who works on this show has an absolute nightmare of a timeline. Then we get this montage and monologue from Lexi about how she's lived her life in her imagination. And we jump to when Lexi was a child and her dad was still around. She cries in the car. Then we go to a scene of her and Rue talking on the roof about how they should prepare for high school, and this one jumps back to the play. But Sam refuses to let us experience this moment unbroken and untainted. In the middle of their conversation, we have this mini scene inserted about the dangers of technology while Lexi is still on the roof. Sam, you can't edit a play like that. Did the audience see that or not? Was this somewhere else earlier or later in the play? Did a TV roll out in front of the stage to play that clip and then just roll off? Or was that Lexi's imagination?
I honestly don't understand what I'm watching.
It's hard to get immersed in a scene when it frantically interrupts itself and nothing about it makes any sense. But don't feel bad if you're confused. There's at least one other person I can think of who's also confused.
I'm never quite sure if this is exactly what Lexi's putting on or if it's their interpretation of it.
Didn't you write the script? And you don't know? So the scene concludes and then Lexi fires into another monologue. Here, she tells us the scene we just watched predates the death of Rue's father. Look, there's a reason most plays are chronological. Films can have flashbacks fairly easily. It's a medium where verisimilitude and realism are viewed as important. It's very easy to let the audience know that they are suddenly at a different point in time. You can use the setting to indicate a different time period, use makeup to de-age the actors, or if all else fails, put text at the bottom. Plays aren't afforded the same level of meticulous visual complexity, so if you were watching this play, it would take until this monologue for you to have any indication of when this scene takes place.
With episode 7 in particular, I would rewrite it, and I'd rewrite it while shooting 40, 50 drafts of it.
Wow, I'm not shocked, because this play reads like 10 different plays got in a car accident together. Rewriting on set? What are you, Stanley Kubrick? I mean, he has been using the Kubrick zoom all season, so yeah, okay, I can see where the influence is coming from now. After the roof scene, we cut to Rue and her sister. Rue promises to catch up once she gets out of rehab. Her sister asks if she ever worries she'll forget Dad, and the two confide in one another. Then it's back to the funeral, again, and we hear 5 seconds of Rue's speech that we've already seen before. Please stop. This scene is so good. When we first saw it in the 5th episode of this season, it was genuinely heartbreaking. And now we're just gonna clip 5 seconds from it, removing all the buildup and emotional context. Show more respect for your audience, you twat. Then we cut to, and get used to hearing that sentence by the way, a dance scene with Lexi's family when her dad was still around. It's incredibly melancholy and difficult to watch. A monologue interrupts this scene where Lexi remarks on how her and Cassie turned out very different. The play is interspersed with real life, and Lexi gives some trite monologue about love. In fairness, it does feel like something a pretentious, naive teenager would say, and then we cut back to Rue and Lexi smoking weed for the first time. So here's the point where I need to ask. What is this play about? If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say the play is meant to be a series of random disconnected anecdotes in semi-chronological order. Which is to say, there isn't really a story to this. Considering the fact that Lexi is a high schooler and an inexperienced writer, I'm almost fine with this. Keyword being almost. There's one colossal problem with that, which we will come to sooner than later. So hold on to your comments for a second about this slice of life anime. Back to Faye. Custer whispers something to her and Ashtray sees. Then she comes over to Fez, rattled. Okay, so if you couldn't tell, this is building towards a raid. I'm going to neglect mentioning these scenes again until enough has happened to warrant dedicating space to it. Now we leave the play once again to see Rue and Jules in the bathroom. Rue says, "Sup," which is the first thing she has said since the intervention. Jules stares. God, I remember when this character was interesting to watch. I think the fact that Sam didn't give her a line in this scene is a testament to him knowing that none of us want to hear her open her mouth anymore. Just let us listen to that sweet Wizard of Oz-esque music. Then we cut to Rue hanging out with her mom. She says that she's going to focus on Gia now, and Rue's sobriety is in her own hands. While I feel like this scene is haphazardly sandwiched between the bathroom and subsequent play scene without any real thought, I do like it. It functions as a nice, stern reality check for Rue. Now we cut to the play again, where Cassie and Maddie have entered 9th grade. Lexi narrates to tell us that they were inseparable, because apparently having one narrator over-explain things this season just isn't enough. Then we get some flashbacks with Lexi that show her bonding a bit with a softer side of Maddie. Then Cassie's actress says,
My parents used to fight all the time too, so I get it.
So my question is, did the people in the audience get to see the dad leave? Or were they meant to infer that based upon stuff she told the audience? How much of the play are we shown, and how much of the play are we not shown? If Charlie Kaufman was writing this script, I would assume there's a large degree of intentionality to that. But as it is,
I would rewrite it, and I'd rewrite it while shooting 40, 50 drafts of it.
I have my doubts. This scene jumps to when Maddie learned Cassie was sleeping with Nate. And this scene does get you to feel for Maddie. However crazy she is, you can't deny that Maddie is pretty principled and would have never slept with Cassie's ex. Upon seeing the scene of them in bed, real Cassie storms out of the auditorium crying. Then she looks in the mirror and has her Joker moment. And then, we cut to her and Nate making out, and Kat being a cam girl is also edited into this for some reason, I guess. And Cassie tells Nate that she wants to be his slave. Then we cut back to the play.
Wait, what? Did you just say Cassie wants to be Nate's slave?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I did. Now, she doesn't use that word directly, but, you read these lines and try to interpret them any other way. It's cringy and awful. And embarrassing. It only serves to make her less of a character and more of a caricature. Back in the play, we have reached the point where Nate and Maddie get together, which leads to Nate's nightmare. Maddie is there, then it's Jules, then Cal shows up and is about to bone Nate, and he wakes up to Cassie in bed. Yeah, no comment there. Jules then smashes the CD of her and Cal. And we're back to the stage, and okay, I'm just gonna be honest, I don't really like the format for this episode. It's a cool premise, kind of, a little bit. The idea of cutting between the play and reality is meta and neat, but the resulting episode moves really fast. I have a hard time getting invested in any of the scenes because by the time I get oriented and assess what is at stake, we've already jumped to the next thing. I know I already mentioned it, but this is what I imagine a freshman film student would write after watching Perfect Blue for the first time. It has the same hallmarks of being trippy, confusing, playing with your understanding of what is and isn't real. But whereas that film used that aspect to explore its themes of identity, fame, and existential horror, here it's done because I guess someone thought it would look cool. And in a lot of ways, it is cool. But just because something is cool doesn't make it well written or good. Hold on to your horses, folks, because now we've come to the main event. The climax of episode 7. We move to the locker room where Maddie tells Nate that he and his football friends are being gay. From here, they burst into a gratuitous, overly homo dance number. And I doth confess, it is really funny. However, a few things. Remember when I spoke earlier about how much of the play's content wouldn't fly at any high school in America? While maybe you could convince me of some of the preceding scenes being passable, this is where it completely flies over the line. My disbelief is shattered like a snow globe on Charles Foster Kane's floor. With all the other stuff which had occurred, these people already weren't really going to high school this season. But this is the cherry on top. This is too far. However, there's another thing I need to mention. When I watch this musical number, there's one movie scene which immediately springs to mind. Do you want to guess which one? It's actually this one. Yup. I'm gonna say it. This is cinematic overcompensation. Much like the Mustafar fight, while there are breathtaking, inventive, and amazing aspects to the scene in question, neither experience puts in the legwork to earn this bombastic finish. It's an extension of what I was talking about before, where it feels like the style is coming before the storytelling. In this scene's defense, it isn't completely pointless and it isn't outright annoying, but when I watch this scene, all I can see is something meant to distract the audience. Something so outrageous that it will be bound to dominate conversations. To make people neglect the missing substance from this episode. So if I have my reservations with this, then why am I such a fan of this? Well, that scene at the end of season 1 had build-up. Rue trying to stay sober was the focus of the series. The music video ending comes at the very end of the season, right after Rue relapses. The season earned the right to that big finish by having it be the climax of the main conflict in question. Now imagine if we threw that scene into a different place in season 1. Say, after Rue takes the fentanyl. It'd still be just as cool, just as catchy, just as visually beautiful, but the meaning of the scene would completely change. It wouldn't be the culmination of an entire season's worth of drama, it would be a pretty distraction which doesn't say very much. Which is, incidentally, exactly how I would describe this scene. Okay, who am I kidding? The cum fountain is awesome. After the song concludes, Nate angrily storms out, saying the play was homophobic. I mean, he's probably not entirely wrong. Since Cassie's sister is the one who wrote that, he then tells Cassie that they're done. Wait, what? How does that make any sense? Just because they're related? Okay. It's a little weird, Nate. She's been living with you and clearly had no involvement in this. It's not like she was portrayed in a flattering way either. But go off, I guess. Anyway, this is where the episode ends. I've watched this episode 4 times now, maybe even 5. And if you couldn't tell by how back and forth my stance seemed to be scene to scene, I am not sure how I feel about it. In a lot of respects, it is at least more interesting than most of the season, but holy cow is it messy. There's so many disconnected threads and random scenes just dumped into a pot of incohesion. While there is technically a timeline present in the play, I'm willing to bet I could re-edit entire 15-minute chunks of this episode in a different order and you wouldn't notice. Furthermore, I can't help but feel that this is a really long-winded and unsatisfying premise for the climax of the season. As far as what is important from this play, really, is Rue seeing herself portrayed with a level of honesty, the gay dance scene that makes Nate dump Cassie, and the scene to come where Maddie confronts Cassie. Everything else is just filler. Some of it is really good filler, or okay filler, but it's still filler. We don't learn a lot of new things about the characters. Did this need to be 2 hours? Or even an hour? Was this the best way to address these storylines? I don't think so. All this does is somewhat contextualize things from Lexi's perspective. But for this season, that's not a great perspective. Having Lexi tell the story means that Jules and Elliot, the 2 most important teenage characters in Rue's storyline this season, aren't in it. They get completely thrown to the side. But that's the storyline we've been building up. That's the storyline we should see reach its conclusion. Dedicating so much time to a play that can't narratively involve them is a misappropriation of the narrative's final remaining 2 hours. To put it concisely, while this episode has its merits, given the events which preceded it this season, this episode's concept was dead on arrival. And oh boy, does the finale just make this so much worse. So let's get to episode 8, titled, All My Life My Heart Has Yearned for a Thing I Cannot Name. Or as I like to call it,
Disappointed!
We open on Fez and Custer. To abridge the specifics, Fez and Ashtray realize Custer is selling them out to the cops over Mouse. Ashtray preemptively kills Custer. Aw shit. Now we're back to another conversation between Fez and Lexi where we see their romantic interests develop. This one feels a little less thematically out of place than the conversation in episode 7, but it still feels like something that probably should have been earlier in the series. Now, is everyone ready for peak cringe? The moment Euphoria Season 2 completely demolishes whatever minor suspension of disbelief the audience might have left? Here it goes. Cassie storms the stage to openly mock Lexi, insinuating her play is self-pitying. Someone asks,
Is this like a part of the play?
The fact that he even asks that just adds to my point that this play is a weirdly disconnected meta mess with no clear rules or through line. Cassie drags an embarrassed Lexi out from the back and then their mom steps onto stage. So minor point, where are the teachers? I'm pretty sure in most schools, as soon as an unscripted person walked on stage, they'd shut the production down immediately and escort them off. But whoever is in charge at this high school really wants to milk the drama, so much so that they move the spotlight to follow these random audience members. Cassie continues to belittle Lexi on stage and insists that she can only judge her because she's never lived a real life. God damn, she's the worst this season. Then Cassie boldly asks if this is the part where she steals Nate.
It is now.
The two fly into an argument in front of the whole school where they call each other a really delightful slur for women. Sue Howard tries to defuse the situation as best she can.
I'm a doctor.
This is a fancy restaurant! This is a fancy restaurant! This is a fancy restaurant!
And it almost works. Then Cassie sees this moment on stage, which is a callback to when she did LSD at the fair in season 1.
Oh my god, I just love everything!
Okay, Lexi had to know that this would upset Cassie. Don't take my word for it.
The whole season, she's like, is Cassie gonna think this is cruel? Like, I don't mean it to be, but I think Lexi kind of does. Like, maybe in her head, she's kind of like, you know what, like, Cassie kind of deserves it.
How does Lexi know about this? I mean, I guess rumors could have circulated about her sister to help her learn this information.
Don't let logic get in the way of a good story.
And what if it's not a good story, Sam? What if it's just not? Maddie storms the stage to fight Cassie. Everyone pulls out their phone to take a video. What a PR nightmare for the school. I know if I had any kind of authority, I'd be stepping in to stop this. Letting this kerfuffle play out, uninterrupted, is a virtual guarantee the next parent-teacher conference is going to run longer than the 7 Samurai. But no one steps in. The disciplinarian is nowhere to be found. Maddie chases Cassie out of the auditorium. Damn, I think she concussed her. I mean, I'm not gonna say Cassie deserved it, but BB sure will.
She deserves that shit. She your boyfriend.
Then we go back to the play. Susie has semi-convinced the audience that it was scripted. Somehow. Surely the audience can't be that stupid, right? But whatever, because right after she says that, we cut yet again. This time to... Oh God! I legitimately forgot this scene existed, and I wish I hadn't remembered. But I made this video and I came this far, so let's just rip the band-aid off. Rue catches up with Elliot. She thanks him for ratting on her and ultimately saving her life. Zendaya gives a good performance, the dialogue is nuanced and naturalistic, and it gives us insight into how she's trying to change as a person. All of that is great. But then, Elliot over here asks Rue if he can play her a song. And suddenly the show just grinds to a halt for 3 minutes and 26 seconds to watch Elliot play a corny ballad from start to finish. I haven't personally delved much into Feike's music. He could be a really great songwriter and lyricist for all I know. But dog, this ain't it. This is a painfully cringy, overly sappy, juvenile song. Much like with Lexi's play, you could argue that it's written by a child and that it's meant to be bad. But with the way Rue responds, I think we were meant to take away some kind of beauty from this scene. And the behind the scenes clips only reinforce this.
Sam just came up to me and was like, yo, I was thinking like you play the guitar in this and like you sing a song.
It came in and jumped in on the score pieces we were working on and played some guitar because he's a great guitarist.
And why don't I send these lyrics over to Z and see what her notes are? And then she's in there, you know, working on some of the lyrics.
It's to Rue, but not really about Rue, but it like is about Rue, but it's like a surreal moment, but it's not. And I'm like, you just made this decision?
So if you didn't catch that, these lyrics were written by Sam and Zendaya and not Labyrinth or Feige. Why am I not shocked? Dominic, I'm sorry, this is so embarrassing. I would have definitely fought Sam and Zendaya to change some of those lyrics. Maybe he did, who knows? All I know is, this scene sucks. It is so bad, I think I may have legitimately blocked it out and suppressed it like a deep traumatic memory. While I generally remembered each scene in the show before starting my rewatch of season 2, I had zero recollection of this until Elliot started playing his guitar. And I have a pretty sharp memory. More so than anything else in the show, this scene should have a trigger warning. The icing on the shit cake is that Elliot has the audacity to say the song isn't finished yet, despite the fact that this song ends in the exact spot where you would expect this song to end. Then Elliot asks Rue if she thinks they can stay friends. And that's it. That's the end of Elliot's character this season. What a great, interesting, complicated addition to the cast. Nothing against Dominic Feige, I think he generally did a good job with the material he was given, but if this was all his character was going to amount to, then why even put him here? Why couldn't Jules have been the one to discover Rue's relapse? It would have made her character a whole lot less stupid, and we wouldn't have witnessed her needlessly cheat for no good reason. Although I stand by reuniting Rue and Jules as a fundamentally poor writing decision, scrapping Elliot would have definitely salvaged some of the damage done by that decision. So thanks, Elliot. Thanks for showing up and contributing almost nothing to the story. Lexi's assistant finds her in shambles backstage and goes to comfort her. She insists that the audience is convinced what they saw was just a part of the play, which again, how? Then Rue starts a Lexi chant which gives her the courage to continue the production. Lexi comes on stage to own up to how none of that was intentional. She then references her conversation with Fez about how some people need to get upset, at which point we rejoin Fez. I love this cut. It's my favorite transition of the whole season. On a technical level, it's simple and immaculate. The way the lens flare match cuts to the flowers hitting the floor is awesome. Furthermore, Lexi was just talking about Fez, so the cut doesn't feel completely random like 90% of the other ones this season. It's very clear the script was written this way, so it could be shot this way, so it could be edited this way. It's the kind of connective tissue I desperately missed from season 1. And here it is now. Better late than never. I know that may seem like a minor point to call so much attention to. It's just a few frames. But I think it's important to stress how these little things add up. Having relevant dialogue or a strong technical direction like this helps create a cohesive experience. It assists in crafting a sequence where the pieces feel intentionally placed and not haphazardly slammed together in whatever order they want to be. If you want a literary analogy, the term most comparable here is flow. Even when dealing with disconnected storylines, the narrative here demonstrates flow. I love it. Then the scene starts playing. Fez tells Ashtray to stay out of this so he can take the fall for Mouse and Custer. But Ash doesn't listen and prepares for a standoff. He grabs all the guns and locks himself in the bathroom. This is intercut with Nate driving his car and loading the revolver. It's not a terrible thing to intercut here, and since it is a really heightened scene in terms of stakes and tension, I'm fine with it. However, for the sake of trying to make it easier to explain, I'm going to approach each scene one at a time. Nate's storyline wraps first, so let's start there. Nate goes into one of the Jacobs construction buildings where he finds his father with a bunch of LGBTQ+ people. He remarks to his father how they both enjoy hurting people, recounts at what age he found the videos of his father's infidelity, and how that affected him as a person. Cal insists that although he is happier now away from the family, he has many regrets and wishes he did better. Then Nate pulls out a flash drive, insisting it holds everything. Shortly thereafter, or literally mashed potato instantly I guess, the police arrive. So did Nate copy that video of Jules before turning it over, or did he just copy videos of some other people who were probably most likely underage? Or is he nailing his father for secret sex recordings without both parties' permission? Wait, what was the point of bringing that gun again? Was it just to instantly add tension to a tensionless scene? Does anyone else find this to be a horribly anticlimactic end to the storyline? So what? Nate just abruptly changes his mind and gets his father arrested? Remember in season 1 when his father physically overpowered him and he was left screaming on the floor? That scene is tense, dramatic, and great. Why couldn't we have a scene like that? Instead, we get this really sudden, clumsy, awkward end to this conflict, which had been, for all intents and purposes, underdeveloped for the last 4 episodes. If this was going to be the season where Nate takes down Cal, then why did we have no build-up to Nate taking down Cal? We see more about Cal's life, we see him go off the rails, but he and Nate have what, 2 conversations this season? And much of what Cal does is independent of Nate. Rather than this play, I would have much preferred watching Nate scheme to defeat Cal, or, at the very least, see some kind of development on Nate's end which would cause him to change his mind. Rue directly told us in episode 6 that the main reason Nate wanted the disc back from Maddie was to protect the family business. When the episode ends, we are still left largely thinking that this was the ultimate point. Now 2 episodes later, Nate decides to do a 180 with 0 buildup, other than he was in a bad mood. This sucks. There was so much more they could have done with Cal, so much more they could have done between Cal and Nate. But no, the story just decided it no longer needs Cal. So long, bud. Somehow, some way, despite literally all moral logic, I honestly empathize with you this season over most everyone else in the cast. The SWAT breaks down the door and arrests Faye and Fez. Ash fires through the door blindly and manages to strike Fez accidentally, as well as some of the cops. The cops eventually break through and kill Ash. Off screen, of course, because he's a child, but most shows wouldn't even do that, so I guess some credit is due. That concludes Fez this season. Yup, we aren't even going to see him in court or jail or the hospital or anything like that. We don't even get to see a reaction from Rue or Lexi. He presumably just goes to jail and no one cares enough to mention it or express remorse.
They don't care!
So far, we've managed to conclude a storyline that no one wanted to end yet, and abruptly abandon 2 storylines or characters without any sense of closure. We are 0 for 3 right now in this finale. In fairness, I must mention that, yet again, we do witness another good transition.
I was in the hall when you died.
Do you get it? It applies to both of them. It's ironic. It's good stuff. Almost. Because at this point, I need to ask, why are we back here? It was really effective when it was used in episode 5. It felt unnecessary in episode 7. And now it feels like we're just spamming this setting to manipulate the audience's emotions. Worse yet, the scene is intercut with Lexi coming into the hospital for both Rue and her own father. But we also get a scene of her being comforted by her mom in the play setting. This disjointed mess almost builds back up properly into a real scene after the Lexi montage. But then it jumps to the play and we hear this version of Rue reciting the episode 5 speech. I really need to ask again, how does this play make sense to anyone in the audience? Given that we saw the carousel scene prior to this, there is no longer any doubt that Lexi is just jumping around the timeline at will. And we don't even know to what extent the Lexi stuff was in the play. I know we can follow this because we have 2 seasons worth of context, but I think if I was sitting in the audience, an average, normal teenager at this high school, without my nose in the drama of this friend group, my head would be spinning. I would be losing my mind trying to comprehend when events take place, what is happening, and why it's all happening. I mean, if we chart out the events chronologically versus how we are shown...
Don't let logic get in the way of a good story.
Oh, who cares? So then we cut to after the play. Rue calls Lexi, compliments her on the play, and asks to hang out. Then, it's back to the real funeral, and then back to the play version of the funeral where everyone is sitting on the lawn. Then it's back to the future, part 2, where Rue sits across from Lexi and thanks her for the play. She says it helped her look at her life and not hate herself. She then insinuates that Lexi turned her trauma into something beautiful, and Rue hopes to one day do the same. This is the main reason I contend that the incoherence of the play doesn't work. While yes, it makes sense that Lexi might be a bad writer, everything in the narrative is suggesting otherwise. The way Rue reacts and the way the audience gets emotionally invested suggests that Lexi's play is, in the universe of the show, a good play. Yet, what we witness is directionless, baffling, randomly arranged, and overly narrated. In many ways, I do enjoy this scene between Rue and Lexi. I think it's heartfelt and sweet, but here again, given what we have seen prior, it doesn't exactly work as it should. What this scene suggests and what preceded it are not in agreement with one another. Rue and Lexi then trauma bond and compare the experiences they had with their father. Rue suggests that although she hates being told her father died for a reason, maybe what people really mean is that you have to give it a reason.
You gotta give all this shit a reason.
Rue, as an addict herself, tries to comfort Lexi and assure her that her father probably does care for her. This part of the scene is also kind and sincere, but it does present me with some distracting meta-narrative thoughts. It's impossible to watch this scene and not think about Sam. He's openly said before that he is Rue, and what we're watching is his younger self thank someone else for taking his trauma and turning it into art. Which means we are watching older Sam use Rue to portray younger Sam, who then complements a play written by Lexi, which was in actuality written by older Sam. And he's having the analog for his younger self insist that he must give his trauma a reason. I find this scene self-humbling, but predominantly masturbatory. On one hand, he is humbling his younger self. On the other, he's using his own characters to praise and insist upon meaning about his own artistic work. If you feel confused, don't worry, love. You're not alone. The scene ends with the two going to hug each other and... Are you serious? So where is this in the play? I thought the photo was meant to be the end. The story at least ended where it began. That's a film thing. I don't think it's a common play thing, but it's at least a film thing. So what is this? What happened in between the funeral scene and this to tie it together? Why did we randomly jump back to the funeral? Would anyone in the audience be able to make sense of this pretentious bullshit? Well, apparently yes, because they're all clapping like a monkey with cymbals. Never mind the fact that I think this transition undercut the scene we just witnessed by needlessly placing us back into the play after seeing a scene that clearly took place days after the play. Which, by the way, is chronologically the last scene of the season, but for whatever reason isn't actually the last scene of the season. I guess it was really important to someone on the editing team that the play make even less sense than it already does. I know this season was written in utter spite of the concept of linear time, but could we have at least ended the season at the latest, most chronological point? Please? Speaking of, let's finally wrap this shit up and go home.
Playtime is over.
Maddie tells Cassie that...
This is just the beginning.
I sure hope not. Jules approaches Rue after the play and says that she loves and misses her. I groan. After all of this, that's really what she has to say. Then Rue kisses her. That's it. That's where we leave this plot line. That was the lost episode. That was just a bunch of cheap walk cycles.
Euphoria.
Betrayed us!
I'm not saying they should have resolved their strife and become besties, but I think just seeing any kind of real interaction between them post-intervention would have been good. Or, at bare minimum, just show us how Jules feels about all this. Rue deliberately skipped over her in episode 6 because she didn't want to dwell on her and Elliot. Fine. But, because this stupid play doesn't include Jules, episodes 7 and 8 provide no means of segueing into her world. We don't see how she's reacting to or processing any of this. We aren't given an opportunity to empathize with or read into her. Season 1 also left a plethora of Jules off screen, but there were a lot of suggestions the audience could use to fill in the gaps. Here, Never mind the fact that she never explains her actions. The only thing we ever really see her do after the intervention is get the disc from Nate. We aren't even given ambiguous scenes with her to interpret. There's just nothing. Plain and simple. So what we're left with is an indefensible cheating with no depth. For a character I really loved, this one stings to watch. But hold up, this episode still has 1 minute left. And fret not, Sam is determined to see how much worse he can make this ending in as little time as possible. Rue steps out of the auditorium for one final monologue. Here, she says Jules was her first love, but that she was too high to remember most of it. She hopes Jules forgives her. This is a little forward, but as a reflective end to the season, I can vibe with it. Then Rue says this.
I stayed clean through the rest of the school year. I wish I could say that was a decision I made. In some ways, it was just easier.
I can't believe I have to say this. Show, don't, fucking tell. So what was the point of the phone call at the end of episode 6? The call suggested that Rue was on her own and that she would have to face this sobriety battle herself. The implication was that we would get to see that battle, that we would get to watch her struggle and grow and fight against this suffocating addiction. Call me crazy, call me psycho, call me American Psycho, but I think following up on the main plot would have made for a more interesting final 2 episodes to season 2 than a school play which advances almost nothing. Despite all the bullshit, the plotline of Rue's drug addiction was holding the show down and keeping my attention with some interesting, engaging drama. But here, in its last moments, even this gets thrown into the gutter. Is this just the biggest f*** you ever to the audience? You spend 2 seasons consistently building this story up only to say, yeah, don't worry about it. Everything off screen is just smooth sailing from here. No temptation, no struggle, no conflict. After her breakdown in episode 5, nothing that interesting really happened. Anyway, look at this cum fountain instead. Isn't this way more interesting? This feels like something we should have been shown at the start of the next season, and not told as a footnote at the end of this one. If nothing significant happened here, don't end your story by saying nothing significant happened here. So much tension of whether Rue will stay clean and for how long has just been dissolved. It's especially infuriating because all you had to do to fix this scene was cut the monologue and raise the music. I can do it right now. Until I get copyright claimed anyway. They even recut it this way for the promo and it works great.
Hey Lord, you know I'll find it.
I remember Ali said,
I will never forget these words.
the thought of maybe being a
great
good
power
person
comes
is what
great
keeps me trying to be a
responsibility.
good person.
So we got a rushed conclusion for Nate and Cal, a half-baked conclusion for Fez, a fine enough conclusion for Cassie and Maddie, I guess, a limp dick conclusion for Jules and Elliot, and an overstated and over-explained off-screen conclusion for Rue. We really made sure to make none of it satisfying, huh?
My hope for the audience after episode 8 is that they feel like they've been through it with these characters and that they love them all despite their faults and flaws, and that they're excited about what happens next.
God, I wish, Sam. God, I wish.
It's the only thing I've ever done, and it's a disaster.
It could be worse. It could be boring.
Hey, that's how I feel about season 2. Because I will say, whatever my problems, the show isn't usually boring. It's super frustrating, but not boring. Despite the abundance of filler and annoying plot lines, there is some really, really, really incredible storytelling in here. For the most part, the stuff with Rue's addiction really works. I think Sam completely nailed that aspect of her character arc. I also think this season shockingly makes Cal work. Despite all the horrible shit he did, I really empathized with him. Faye is also a welcome addition to the cast. There's a number of technical achievements as well. The wardrobe is obviously as impeccable as ever. All the credit in the world to Heidi Bevins on that one. The acting is a little uneven, but when we are treated to a good performance, it's top of the line. And despite the fact that I prefer the look of digital, I admire the sheer ambition that went into using a film stock that's notoriously finicky and was out of print for many years. I was originally going to title this video Euphoria Season 2 Sucks, but truthfully, I'm not sure I can bring myself to say that. Because it doesn't totally suck. It's just a giant disorganized mishmash. If I could be allowed but one more analogy to make a perfect and well-understood comparison, I'd say this season reminds me of the Hobbit adaptations. The script is a meandering and underbaked mess, the editing is a frantic and unrestrained disaster, and the result is something which feels flashy moment to moment but leaves no lasting emotional impression. There are really great moments and really great scenes, but very little of it works in tandem with each other. The final product is constantly at odds with itself. And it's also sandwiched between, well, crap. Which brings us back to Sam and everything else behind the scenes. I am not a stan of Sam, nor am I a hater of him. I am what you might call a radical Sam Levinson centrist. Leventrist, if you will. And as a Leventrist, I think he's a talented, highly ambitious, somewhat immature director and edgelord-in-chief. But whatever your opinions of him, I do just want to say this real quick. Writing a compelling narrative is very difficult. Trying to keep a narrative compelling after having to pivot the main thrust and conflict of the story is even harder. In some instances, it's borderline impossible. I don't know what happened behind the scenes any more than you do. We can all certainly have our guesses, but at the end of the day, we just don't know. Given how much money is in this show, it'll probably be years before any kind of official information sees the light of day. But I do think throwing all the anger and blame onto Sam probably isn't fair. Or Zendaya and the other producers for that matter. Not that anyone was really blaming her, except me in this video because I was being an absurdist jerk. Ultimately, I think blaming Sam for the state of Euphoria's second season is just a tad bit undeserved. In that way, I somewhat feel for Sam. I realize I have made some pretty biting comparisons about his work in this essay, but just because I don't 100% approve of everything he said and done, doesn't mean I think that warrants him being a scapegoat for people's anger. Whatever Season 3 turns out to be, can we all just turn our hatred dials for the people involved back a little? If you want to critique his work, both from a narrative or even a political standpoint, I'd be Captain Hypocrite to tell you otherwise. I obviously think that's valid, but let's not make it personal. He just wrote a really good season of TV and then a sort of subpar and highly disappointing season of TV. I promise there are people and things in this world way more deserving of your rage. Says the guy who made a 3.5-hour video, but you know. Point is, can we all just leave Sam alone? What's this? The Idol? The Weeknd? Like that Loverboy song? Plagiarism accusations? Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, 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 no. Yeah, we're going to need to talk about that one another day. Video over. Goodbye.